Thanks everyone for coming. Tonight's meeting is not a town meeting per se. There's no warrant, there are no warrant articles. The intent of this meeting is to come together, provide information on the seriousness and the consequences that the towns are facing with its budget constraints. And so I'll do the best I can. We're kind of broken up here. To the far left is Mark Haddad and representatives of the Town of Groton. To my left is the Advisory Board, the Select Board, myself, Leah, and Karen. To my right are representatives of the Groton Dunstable School District, and to their right is the representatives of the Groton Dunstable Schools. Jason Silva, who is walking behind me here, is going to present and walk through the FY2025 budget. So, with that being said, all of the members that are sitting at these tables have had a hand extensively in the decision-making process of how this budget got built. This budget has been going on now since probably September. It's the longest budget cycle we've had, and the budget has put the town's finances, Dunstable's finances, in serious stress. And so Jason is going to take over for me here, and when he's done, we're going to take questions and answers from everybody. Mark Haddad may have some. Are you going to present, Mark? He's going to present his budget. This is the best way to resolve this budget issue. Groton is faced with the same situation Dunstable is, smaller numbers, same problem. So, with that being said, Mr. Jason, the Dunstable Town Administrator, is going to take over and present. I think everybody can see it's a little faded. Probably needs a bulb, but it is what it is.
Okay, before I go, I think do boards and committees need to call their meetings to order?
The Dunstable Select Board has been called to order. It was done earlier at 6:30. Okay. And Dunstable Advisory Board is called to order too.
Okay.
I'm going to call the school committee to order.
We have no quorum.
Don't have a quorum? Okay. You ready? All right. Hi, everybody.
It's that top microphone that you're going to need to speak in.
Okay. All right, this is going to be a trick. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? If I speak louder, 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 yeah?
I'm afraid the camera won't pick it up. That's my concern. So let's just see if we can
Move this one on the side.
move this towards it.
There we go.
Pull up a little.
All right, all right.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you. Okay, that's much better. All right. So for those who don't know me, I'm Jason Silver. I'm the Town Administrator for Dunstable. I've been here for a little over a year, and it's been quite the journey so far. So I have a long slide deck, but I think the most important part of this meeting is meant to be the Q&A, the back and forth. So don't think I'm trying to run through it just to run through it. I am going to go probably quicker than I normally would, but I'm happy to go back at the end if there are questions or someone needs clarification or wants more information. So I'm going to speed talk a little bit, but just know that if there's any interest in going back, happy to do that at any point. All right, you can move on to the first. I'm just going to provide a real brief overview of the current fiscal year, FY24. Because, as most of you know, there was a need for an override. Well, there was a request for an override for this fiscal year in FY24. This slide just compares FY23 to FY24. The major point of this is that the municipal side of the budget saw a decrease in its overall budget in FY24 for this fiscal year of approximately 1.6%, 1.7%. The overall budget went up slightly less than 2%. The school budget in FY25, the Groton Dunstable Regional School District and Lowell Technical School went up approximately 5.25%. Next slide. So like I said, we did go for an override in '24. It did pass town meeting, and it failed at the ballot. So that resulted in several budget reductions that were necessary. Go ahead. Next slide, please. So the major reductions that we experienced were in public safety, and both chiefs are in back. They can speak to this later in the meeting if they'd like. But the major reductions, one, we lost a police officer position during the overnight shift. So now in the overnight shift, we have one police officer covering the entire town. And in the fire department, we lost one per diem firefighter position during the day. So that means we only have budgeted one firefighter during the day shift in the fire department. Fortunately for us in FY24, a generous donor came forward and actually funded that position for FY24. So we still have 2 firefighter positions covering the fire station during the day, covering the town. But that goes away in FY25 unless we fund the balance. I wanted to talk a little bit about the budget process, and Ron mentioned this earlier in his opening remarks, but the budget process in Dunstable this year started far earlier than it typically does. And I think in Groton and for the school district, it even started earlier than we started. I think theirs started in July. So we started our process in August, and it's been a long, lengthy process. We've had how many meetings? How many presentations? How many discussions? I mean, a lot. And I thought it was, comparing my first budget process with this budget process, it was a much more collaborative process. I felt like we're partners in the process. We started early to align our budget process with the town of Groton in the school district. And what it did for the town of Dunstable, at least, it provided us a seat at the table when these discussions were happening. Not that we didn't have one in the past, but from day one, we were at the table as part of these discussions. And I think overall resulted in a better budget product for all of us. So just real quick, the initial budget requests, our initial budget requests resulted for town and school was an 11.8, almost a 12% increase in our overall budget. It resulted in a deficit of almost $1.3 million. The town budget requests were 9% increase. The school district initial requests were 13.5% increase. That's both regional school districts. So as the process went on, the end result was a reduction of almost $300,000 on the town side to slightly less than a 3% overall increase. The school budget, the school district's budget assessments went up $315,000, or an overall increase of 9.71. Overall, 7.15 overall budget increase, which equates to $933,000. So really quickly, FY25 budget review, we're going to start with expenditures. It's no secret the major expense in the town of Dunstable is the school districts. That's 65% of our overall budget. Our overall spend is almost $9.1 million on the school side. The towns make up the balance of 35% of almost 4.9. The second highest budget category is public safety at 13%. This next slide compares FY24 to FY25 and highlights the budget changes between each budget category. Some of the major, more significant changes: general government overall was reduced by $26,000 or 4%. Public safety has been increased by $100,000. That is essentially because we are trying to restore the 2 positions that I just spoke about that were reduced for this fiscal year. Library and recreation increased by 3.6. That is the major driver with that is our IT budget falls under that category, and we signed a new contract, 3-year contract, that we publicly bid that came in higher than what we were paying in prior years. Insurance assessment increased by almost 4%. Schools increased by 9.71%. And this slide just gives you a summary and overview of the town increase in the school assessment increases that I just went over, so I'm not going to repeat some of that. Okay, so revenues. Our major source of revenue is real estate taxes. 86% of our overall revenue comes from real estate taxes. We have really 4 major sources that we're using to balance our budget. Real estate tax by far is the highest. We also have local receipts, which are local permits and fees that the municipality can charge. The largest driver of that number is motor vehicle excise tax. And then we also get state aid on our cherry sheet. We've also been using free cash. I'm going to get into this a little earlier. But we have what the state calls free cash. It's essentially one-time revenues that we've been using to pay for reoccurring costs since, I believe, 2018. I'll get into that a little more. But that's the 4th revenue source to balance our budget. Really briefly, I'm going to go way over, and I'm going to have to go a little quicker. So our tax levy is made up of 1, last year's levy, 2.5% new growth, which is new development in town, and then our excluded debt. So all that total you'll see for FY25 is $12,530,174. This next slide shows our tax levy versus our budget expenditures. You'll see that there's a gap there. And for FY25, our expenditure increase is over double what our levy increase is. So that's when it's all said and done, this slide, I think, really demonstrates the funding problem that we're seeing. You also see state aid and local receipts. These are our other 2 real revenue streams to balance our budget. Outside of real estate taxes, these 2 revenue streams have only increased 1.4% over the last 5 years on an average. So real quickly to talk about free cash. So over the last 5 years, the town's reliance on this free cash has dramatically increased. Free cash is essentially more revenue than we planned on to balance the budget, plus less expenditures than we budgeted. So those 2 numbers, basically our savings equate to our free cash number. It's our savings account, essentially. So each year you generate, hopefully, if you're budgeting right, a certain amount of free cash that you can get certified and then use. Department of Revenue suggests that you use it for one-time expenses like capital or reserves. We've been using this to bake into our operating budget to balance because we've had a serious funding gap over the years. And as you saw in the slide, as you see, that's the balance. But on the last slide, what you saw was the use of free cash since 2018 has gone from 133 to 574. So that's just essentially the demonstration of the fact that there is a structural problem with this budget. Thank you. So some major changes that you see in this budget in FY25. One is that we've really been aggressive in seeking out regionalization opportunities. So we've regionalized our treasurer collector position and our town clerk office with the town of Pepperell. We've been able to see, I think, in some ways, better service, thanks to Bonnie staying on and helping with that transition. And we're experiencing savings in both of those department budgets. We're also regionalizing dispatch with Patriot Regional Emergency Communication Center in Pepperell, which is saving us significant money in the police department budget. like I said earlier, we're trying to restore those 2 public safety positions, 1 in police, 1 in fire. And so a major change you see the public safety budget salary budgets going up more than other budgets. That's the reason why. It's because we're trying to restore those positions for public safety's sake. Employee benefits insurance have just traditionally increased more than general expenses. So pension is going up 6%, health insurance is planned for 5%, and general liability is planned for 10%. This last slide goes over some other budget variances that we're seeing. Board of Health, Neshoba Associated Boards of Health, we're seeing larger than normal increases. IT, like I said, mostly related to the new IT contract. And there are other things here, but nothing so substantial we need to talk about unless you want to. So when seeing the school forecast for the next 3 years, we thought it would be, we had developed our own forecast last year. So we thought it'd be a good idea to kind of dust ours off, update it to see where we were at. Because with the increase in spending in the schools, the increased budget assessment in the schools, I always get that wrong, they have to remind me of that. The increased assessment in to our budget, we knew that our revenues were not going to keep up with their forecast. So in order to understand how that increase relates to our increase, we went through a forecasting process. And so these are the assumptions that we've made. Essentially, in a nutshell, 2% increase, 1% general expenses, 3% increase in contract services, energies, utilities, and building maintenance. That's, in a nutshell, how we forecasted the next 3 years, next 2 years, FY26-27. Our revenues, we basically stayed consistent with the increases we've seen in the past. So based on those assumptions, we have a funding gap in 26 and 27 of $755,000 and $555,000 respectively. This is a breakdown of that forecast, this slide that I'm not going to go into in great detail unless someone wants to. And then this next slide is the forecast comparing the town and the school increases. Overall in FY25, like I said earlier, it's a 7.15% increase. In 26, it's a 7.72 increase. And in 27, it's a 6% increase. So those numbers are the override numbers by year. All total, it's slightly less than $2.1 million override for the 3 years. This slide is meant to give us an idea of the magnitude of the deficit. So the deficit's $763,000 for FY25. All of our general government expenses, every single one of them, is equal to $633,000. It's over $100,000 less. All human services, library expenses, $397,370. Fire department budget is $363, highway $577. I just point that out because it's a sizable deficit that we're facing in 25 and 26 and 27. So what are the impacts? I wanted to put this slide so there's full transparency with our average single-family tax bill. It is above what the state average is. I will just point out, though, that the growth in our tax bill over these last 5 years has been less than the state average. So while our tax bill is higher, the growth over that time period has been less. So these slides just try to give you an idea of what the tax implications are of the override request. So without any override, it's estimated, based on numbers given to me by the assessor's office, that the total increase over those 3 years will be slightly over $1,000. So about $333 on average per year. That includes CPA. So the override impacts all total slightly under $1,700 over those 3 years. So all total in FY25, the average increase will be slightly over $1,000. In 26, the average increase will be $950. I almost said $950,000. $950. 27, $786. So for the 3-year total, it would be $2,750. What? Keep going.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, that's all right.
I was looking at the previous slide.
No problem. So without the override, what are the potential impacts? We have discussed the options that we have to consider, but we have not dove into those any more than that. So what are the options? One, which I think Groton does, which is just proportionally take the bottom line deficit and divide it by the proportion of spending. So 65 to schools, 35 to town. Another way to look at it is take the overall available new revenue, divide that 65-35, take that deficit and assign it to the schools in town. And the other option is just to give it to one or the other, the entire amount. This goes over the details of what those impacts would be to the school and the town. I'm not going to go over this in great detail other than to say the range of impact to the schools is the entire deficit, 763. 65% of the bottom line deficit is 496. And remember, we're 23% of that, so they need to multiply that to make that number up. And then for the town, it's anywhere from the entire deficit to $73,000, which would be 65% of new available revenue committed to us. 30, I'm sorry, that should say 35. We've also included capital requests in FY24. We were unable to. We used COVID ARPA funds that we still have. So we've been able to cover capital costs up for this fiscal year with ARPA funds, but those are going away. So we need to continually invest in our department. So these are our capital requests for FY25. And I just wanted to lastly just point out some future planning that the select board has been focused on. Just recently, they've created, one of the major things that one of the things we need to look at is how to generate more revenue outside of the tax base. So the select board has created an economic development committee, land use committee, and master plan implementation committee. It's a mouthful, I know, but there are 3 new committees with actually a lot of new people, which is great. And some new ideas and some new energy. And so the purpose and intent of those committees is to look at and to try to identify potential economic development opportunities, evaluate current use of town-owned land and future options, and then implement some of the recommendations of the town's master plan. Whew, okay. That was a lot. Sorry it took way longer than I wanted to. So we'll take questions. I'll take questions, any questions after, but for now I want to hand it off and introduce Mark Haddad from Groton, Town Manager of Groton. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, while I'm waiting for Laura to get that up, my name is Mark Haddad. I'm Groton's town manager. I've been town manager for 15 plus years. And we followed the same process that Jason talked about. We started our budget process really early this year in July. We formed what we call the Town Managers Working Group. And that group started working in July. And our sole purpose was to address issues that we saw in FY24 that we didn't want repeated in FY25. And we wanted to get a jump on it as soon as possible. So as soon as Laura gets my presentation up, I will go through what we did in Groton. It's very similar to the presentation that you just had from Jason. So you'll see a lot of similarities.
Sorry, I should have downloaded it.
How many people do we have from each town? Like, how many Groton folks are here? How many Dunstable folks? Cool. All right. Just wanted to gauge who's here.
And we're going to repeat the same presentations next Wednesday in Groton at the Senior Center, beginning at 7 a.m., 163 West Main Street. PM. Did I say a.m.? My day starts at 2 a.m., so the days blend together. Thank you. So you can jump ahead 2 slides. So as I stated at the beginning, the FY25 budget process started earlier than usual. The Town Manager's TRICOM Working Group began reviewing the issues surrounding the development of the fiscal year 25 budget in July. The Working Group conducted studies of comparable communities and school districts and determined that spending by the town and the school district was in line with those comparables. The Working Group developed revenue and expenditure assumptions based on the best information we had available at that time. Next slide. The outcome of the Working Group showed that the town of Groton would be facing a deficit of $3.9 million in fiscal year 25. So some of the issues that created that deficit, a lack of sustained revenue sources, the allowance that we're able to do growth under Proposition 2.5 does not keep up with inflationary pressures. Lack of consistent and appropriate support from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I have a slide that will go into a little bit more detail on that. And we were no longer receiving federal funding that was used to balance the budget and help balance the budget of the school district. That should say FY22 and 23. I apologize for the typo. And then the use of the excess and deficiency fund by the Groton Dunstable Regional School District to balance the budget. Those funds wouldn't be available either. Now, if you look at this slide, and I'm going to post this on the town's website tomorrow, so you'll be able to see this in more detail, but basically we average in growth in our levy limit between 3.3% and 4.5% per year. That sounds like a pretty healthy growth in taxes under Proposition 2.5, but when you see what our costs are, you'll see that that is not enough to sustain growth. One of the issues, and this is a slide that really scares me more than anything, is the lack of sustained support from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Since fiscal year 2015 through fiscal year, the estimate for fiscal year 2025, the average increase in net aid for the town of Groton has been 1.52%. The net school funding over that same time period averages 0.34%. Because it's so low, that forces the towns of Groton and Dunstable to rely on the assessments to balance their budget. Their budget growth over that time has probably been between 4 and 5%, but they're only getting 0.34% increase from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which puts a bigger burden on the towns of Groton and Dunstable to balance their budget. So this is really worrisome. But some of the things that Groton has done over time is we've tried to find as many revenues in our estimated receipts to try to balance that out and provide as much support to the town of Groton as possible to fund the budget. So we have looked at increases in some of the available revenues to us. We've seen a 101% increase in our local meals tax. We've seen a 280% increase in the room occupancy tax. Our excise taxes have gone up 15%. Our pilots from our nonprofit partners have gone up 53% over that time period. Our fees have gone up 10%. License and permits, because we've had some growth, have gone up about 120%. And our country club, after many years of having deficits, saw a rebound during the COVID years, and we've gone up 77% in our country club revenue, which has helped not only support the country club, but provide some needed cash to maintain our operating budget. The next chart, this shows the growth in the town of Groton's budget and the Groton Dunstable Regional School District budget over that same time period. And you can see the growth hasn't been, because of the way that the town's numbers look at, the growth has been about equal over time, except for the last couple of years. So the growth in the operating expenses has been pretty consistent between Groton and the Groton Dunstable Regional School District. This next slide talks about what I mentioned earlier, that the money that we have from the levy does not keep up with the expenses that we're paying. And those expenses are salaries, wages, benefits, utility costs, pension, health insurance, and the like. And you can see on this chart that we have a negative every year, that most of the years have been negative, that our revenues coming in is not enough to support our expenditures. And we've been forced to find other ways to fund the operating budget. And it finally came to a head in fiscal year 25 in the town of Groton, where we have no choice but to seek additional funding in tax revenue. So to balance the fiscal year 25 budget, the working group determined that an override of Proposition 2.5 was necessary to do that, or the school and the district would face some significant cuts. Next slide. So to develop our level services budget, what I should do is probably explain what that is. The level service budget, and that was a determination by the Finance Committee and the Select Board, that we wanted to maintain services in fiscal year 25 at the same level as 24. No new positions, no new services, everything the same. And the problem with that is the costs did not meet, the revenues that we were taking in did not allow us to maintain those services without additional revenue. So when we put the budget together, the fiscal year 24 budget was about $250,000 under the levy limit, so we had some extra money left over from last year. New growth was certified last year at $36 million, but next year we're only estimating it at $20 million. So while we went up $564,000 in levy last year, we're only going to go up $301,000 at this time this year. And then state aid went up, $32,000 to $1,145,000 under the governor's budget. And then we anticipated a modest increase in our estimated receipts that I showed you before of about $130,000. The next slide shows that we're anticipating new revenues next year of about 3.17%, thus the problem that we're having going into FY25. So the town and the school district took steps to reduce that anticipated deficit of $3.9 million. Some of the things that we did is the Groton Dunstable Regional School District is going to phase out their use of E&D and phase in full-day kindergarten over 3 years, and they made some other budget adjustments which caused a reduction in their budget. The Select Board, in conjunction with the town of Dunstable, voted to join the Patriot Regional Emergency Communications Center in Pepperell. The Select Board also voted to change our health insurance to Maya, which saved us significant funds going into next year. And then the town scrubbed revenues, and again, we found extra revenues, and then we made miscellaneous budget adjustments. If you look at this next slide, you can see the school district adjustments totaled $1.4 million that we were able to reduce the deficit by that. The regional dispatch saved us $464,000. Health insurance saved us $117,000. Neshoba Tech, we estimated more in the budget than the actual assessment, so we had a little bit of a savings there. As I stated earlier, $130,000 in new miscellaneous revenues, and then our miscellaneous budget adjustments where we went down from some of the earlier estimates that the TRICOM had put together. So our new projected deficit was $1.7 million going into next year. So by joining just to show what we did, by joining the Maya Health Insurance in FY25, the budget only went up 3.38%. The previous year had gone up 13.5%. The pension budget's going to go up 6.36%. We have no choice in that. We have to fund that. Fiscal year 25 is the third year of all our union contracts, and the COLA was agreed to at 2%. Total salary increases next year of $231,000. Excluded debt, which covers our excluded projects, including the Florence Roach Elementary School, the police station, the fire station, the new senior center, and the DPW garage, along with the library roof, is going up $300,000, and we anticipate that the country club is going to continue to operate well. One of the things that we had to address is due to a decrease in cable revenues, we're going to eliminate the Cable Enterprise Fund in FY25 and make it a town department. So in FY25, we're recommending that the cable department be supported by $155,000 from the town's free cash account to get it into the budget and allow revenues to grow for our receipts reserved for appropriation account, so that the revenues coming in from the cable companies, Verizon and Spectrum, will be able to fund it in future years, so it will only be a one-year use of free cash on that. And then we had no, as I said, level services, we had no major increases in our operating budget. So if you look at this, next slide, this is very, very important. The level services budget for next year, the main budget for the town of Groton municipal operation is only going up 2.23%. Neshoba Tech, because we've had more students going there, unfortunately is going up 27%. The district's proposed operating assessment to the town of Groton is going up 10%, and the overall town budget for next year is going up 6.8%. So 6.8% keeping level services, 3.17% of new revenues. The math just doesn't work, thus the need for additional revenues for next year. And I really have to say that, working cooperatively with the town of Dunstable and the Groton Dunstable School District, trying to do everything together, we really scrubbed every possible revenue that we can find. We made as many consolidations as we thought to maintain services within the municipal budget to keep things funded. So, going into, and Jason went over this as well, we looked at the next 3 years, and based on a set of assumptions, including anticipated increases in the operating assessment of the Groton Dunstable Regional School District assessment, anticipated salary increases based on our union contracts, historical increases in health insurance and pension costs, and an average increase in expenses over the last 5 years, I projected a deficit of $5.5 million over that time frame. If you look at the next screen, you can see that based on the revenues that we anticipate without additional tax revenue from an override, we'd have a $1.7 million deficit next year, which would grow to a $3.6 million deficit, or another 1.7 in fiscal year 26, and then another 1.7 in fiscal year 27. So a cumulative increase of $5.5 million over that time frame, thus the request for the $5.5 million 3-year override. So what did we do in order to address that? We proposed the $5.5 million override, and you can see on this screen, it wipes out the deficit over that time, and it leaves us with a little surplus of about $357,000 at the end of the 3rd year by doing that override. On this next slide, it shows the amount of money we would have to use each year. $1.7 million of that $5.5 million would be used in FY25, $1.8 million in FY26, and $1.7 million in FY27. And that's how it would balance the budget over those 3 years. Looking at the next slide, this is the impact on the FY25 tax bill. And the general, if there was not an override of Proposition 2.5, the tax bill would go up $306 for general expenses and then $63 for our override, for our debt exclusions, rather. I apologize for that mistake. And then the total for the override, the tax bill would go up $431. And when I say the tax bill, it's the average tax bill based on a home value at $694,000 in the town of Groton. This next slide shows what the 3-year impact is. In FY25, the override would account, the overall tax bill would go up $737, of which the override would account for $431, $730 in FY26, which the override is $480, and then $702 in FY27, the override would account for $438. The bottom chart shows the impact of the debt exclusions that are out there. We do have some more Florence Roach debt that we're going to have to take on, and then we have to take on the PFAS excluded debt to solve the PFAS problem at the Groton Dunstable Regional High School and the surrounding properties in Dunstable that were impacted by that. This next chart, it's hard to see, obviously. I should have picked a better color, and I apologize. But it shows what the impact is and the tax implication over the 3 years. And again, I will post this on the town's website, and you'll be able to look at this in more detail. So how would we balance the budget going into fiscal 25 without the additional revenue from an override? To balance the budget, we would have to cut the proposed level services budget of $1.7 million. Under previous practice, to eliminate a deficit in the town of Groton, we have done in a couple of years, 60% of that deficit would be absorbed by the Groton Dunstable Regional School District assessment, 40% by the town. That would mean that we would do a 3.57% cut from the assessment, which would reduce Groton Dunstable's assessment to Groton by $1,026,000, but that would be compounded by a similar cut that would have to happen in the town of Dunstable. So the overall budget from the school district would go down about $2 million in assessments, which would cause a whole host of problems for the school district moving forward, which I'm sure Sherry and Laura will get into when they get up here. The reductions at these levels of magnitude beyond any reductions we've ever made in the town and the school district. So very quickly, looking at what we would have to do to general government, there would be about a 2.35% cut in general government. Reductions to public safety would total $222,150. Cuts to our Department of Public Works would total $188,000 or 7.8%. Reductions to our library and citizen services would total 4.6% or $100,000. And the cuts to employee benefits would total about $114,000 because of layoffs in those other departments. This next slide shows that, Groton is not alone in Massachusetts facing these, and this is just a small example of surrounding communities that are facing the same problems that we're facing in Groton going into fiscal year 25. So, that concludes my presentation. After Laura and Sherry give theirs, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna not be able.
I didn't bring my high heels today. No. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Sherry Kersey. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations for the Regional School District. This is a presentation that we've given several times at school committee. I'm probably going to go a little bit faster tonight because I know we want to get to your questions. So the highlights, when the questions we think you're going to want answered are why is the budget up so high, or why are the assessments up a lot higher than they used to be. So just to point out that, actually you can just go and we'll go through the thing. It is a level services budget. What we consider level services is, are we providing the same level of service to our students as we have in the past. There are new positions that are added on in this budget, but they are to support things that are already happening in the school district, and I'll get to that when we get to those specifics. Next. So what are the major drivers that are making our budget up this year? Using less E&D. E&D is our free cash, as it's been explained by the town administrator and manager. So we were using, in 2024, we're using over $911,000 of our savings to balance our operating budget. We have reduced that down to $500,000, which means that we need to assess $411,000 more to the towns. So that alone will make the assessments go up. We added $100,000 of full-day kindergarten salaries. Currently, we collect about $400,000 in full-day kindergarten. This is a phase-in approach that we have. Over the next 3 years, it'll be absorbed fully into the budget, and then we will not have a fee for full-day kindergarten. Anticipated new positions. We're looking at a grade 2 teacher at Florence Roach. We have been operating, there was a class that came in kindergarten, was small enough that we reduced it by one classroom. With the Swallow Union students coming over to Florence Roach, there may be the need that we're going to have to add that position back in grade 2. So we have the allowance in that for there. A behaviorist interventionist. Flora, you do a better job explaining what that is than I can. An additional ELL teacher. We currently have 2, but we actually have more ELL students than we've ever had in the district, and we are approaching the ratio that the state dictates that we must have teacher to student to ELL student. So we put in for the allowance for that. One maintenance position. With the Florence Roach building opening up, it is more square footage. We always had planned on there being an extra maintenance person. Actually, 2 years ago, we had a vacancy that we didn't fill, knowing that we would be filling it in 25 when the building opened. So salary, can you go back one more?
Sure.
Back another one, because that was just one point of it. Okay. Estimated salary and wages increase are almost $2 million. We are 77% of our budget is salaries. So when our salaries go up, that's most of our budget. Our health insurance.
I'm just going to switch. Keep talking.
Okay. Our health insurance, we have budgeted right now for 10% increase. Our renewal we'll know in a couple weeks, so we may be pleasantly surprised to be able to reduce that number. We have an additional, our utilities are up $209,000, of which $100,000 of that is a line item for PFAS. We have been required to do quarterly testing of the surrounding properties, water quality. If it dictates a certain level, we have to provide them drinking water. And in some cases, we've had to put in filtration systems. And that is a directive from the DEP. So until we can get hooked up to town water, we have this $100,000 line item to pay for those expenses.
Do you want to Or you want
Yeah.
to go back?
And the extra, the last piece of the extra positions. Currently, we have 1.6 FTEs that work as an assistant, administrative assistant to the front office at Flow Row. Again, with another 150-ish kids coming into that, we had planned on increasing that to 2 FTEs, so making the part-time person a full-time. Salary projections, $2 million. We're currently in collective bargaining with our teachers and paraprofessionals, and we are looking at also increases that are market corrections, and so that is all happening. And if you wanted to know more about that, there is a slide deck on our website called Groton Dunstable by the Numbers, and all the market comparisons are on there, so you can take a look at that. Health insurance, again, I said it was a 10% this current year it was a 7.52. We're hoping it'll be even lower this year. Again, I'll know in a couple weeks what our final number is on that. PFAS, I already explained. We stayed within, we always present the towns with a 5-year projection, so we really tried to stay within our 5-year projection with the other expenses. So between heat and utilities, we did that. Transportation, we actually presented we projected a larger increase than it actually is, because the state actually gave us more money last year on regional transportation reimbursement. That money has to be used in the subsequent year to reduce the assessment to the towns for transportation. So that we saved about $75,000 that way. And then Middlesex Retirement, our pension system, we had projected an 8.5% increase, which is usually what we go up, and it was only 6.6, so we had a savings of $26,000. So when all's said and done, our operating budget itself is up $3.4 million, which is a 7.29% increase. Historically, you can see, I have the last 5 years up there. This current year is a 6.39. The year before that, we had actually more ESSER and ARPA funding, which was the federal CARES Act and the COVID money. So we were able to use that money before we used our own, and so that was only a 2% operating budget. And then prior to like the COVID, you can see it was 3 and 4%. One thing I want to point out too, when we're doing our projections for the 5 years, the way that the towns are assessed, we take our total budget, we subtract out our state funding and some other little funding that we get, and whatever's left over, the state says, okay, Dunstable, you have to pay this, the minimum. Groton, you have to pay this, the minimum. And whatever's left is proportionate based on a 5-year rolling average for the 2 towns. If we were only to look at this current year, Dunstable would have actually had a larger assessment, because they actually have 23.35% of the students, whereas in the rolling average, it's only 22.74. So that's one thing we need to take into consideration, because for every $1 that shifts in Dunstable, $3 shift in Groton. So it's something that we watch, and it will put a bigger burden on Dunstable as your population, if it continues on that trajectory. Assessment versus budget. So we saw a slide that said our budget is up $3.4 million. The reason for that is twofold. One, we have less revenues to take off the top, so excess and deficiency. And what we got from it is, Mark pointed out, we only got about $70,000 more in our estimated Chapter 70. That's our support from the state. So with less revenues to offset the assessments, and then our expenses going up, the major drivers that I showed, both conditions are happening in this year. So what that equates to is in Dunstable 11.7% increase. Remember, our budget went up 7%, but the assessment is going up 11.73%. And in Groton, it's 10.81. So in all, the total assessments are going up $3.7 million. So again, 3.4 million expenses are up, but the assessments are up 3.7 because the burden is falling more on the towns than from the state. It was pointed out already, we know that this is not a one-year problem. We're projecting out a 3-year. So everything that we have provided both towns is looking at at least a 3-year. We have some 5-year projections as well. And this is where Laura takes over.
Thanks, Sherry. I want to emphasize the last statement that she just made. We have told senior staff that if the override is to pass, then that is the budget we are committed to for the next 3 years. And so if something goes up, if we have a student come in that we didn't expect, that needs special education services that we didn't expect, then we need to cut that money from someplace else in the budget. So that's been the discussion we've already had with senior staff. The results of the override would be devastating to the school district. The hardest part to understand about school funding is that between 75% and 80%, no matter where you go, no matter what school district you look in the state of Massachusetts, is salaries and benefits. So that's why if you're talking about cutting, it's very hard to make any significant cuts without cutting people. And so you'll see that of this. So when we looked at this, you'll see that the FTEs that are, and I apologize, but that's a technical term in school funding, FTEs. It's called full-time teacher equivalent, just means a person, a full-time person working. And you can see the FTEs that are at each of the major departments that we have across the district. I want to call to your attention that it shows that central office going up 1 and school administrators going down 1, and that was just a switch of that FTE was moved from a school administrator to a central office administrator. That doesn't mean that they work in central office. That means they are a district-wide resource that we can deploy among the district. So, for example, right now we have a math K-8 coordinator who's actually working at the high school with some of the high school teachers to try to help students that are having difficulty in math. She's a district-wide resource. She's under central office, but she doesn't work in the superintendent's office. Next slide. This is not a presentation of recommendations, but rather of suggestions. None of the options you're going to see, and I already gave this presentation on Valentine's Day of all days, so I'm just going to go very quickly through it. But the reductions were made by the principals. They just decided, we took off $1.4 million right off the top. That would be central office and district-wide resources. And then we took the rest of the deficits and we put them out proportionally to the schools based on their enrollment, and then said to principals, you tell us how you want to do this. At the elementary school, they wanted to protect the class sizes in the classrooms and the general education classrooms, and they took the reduction someplace else. At the middle school, they had to spread it across the school, and so she spread it across the school the best she could. At the high school, they wanted to first look at what they could do for stipends and fees before they cut staff members. Again, this was decided by the leadership teams of each of the schools. Next slide. So where were we? Just so you can understand where we came from. When I came here in 2016, there was a history where maintenance staff had been reduced to 4 to cover all of the acreage in the buildings in the district. They cut 2.5 reading teachers. All the certified librarians had been cut. The curriculum coordinators had been cut. And our state accountability level in 2012 dropped to 2. What does that mean? That means they dropped from 1, which means you're doing great, to 2, you're on the borderline of state involvement, and 3 would have been state involvement at some point. So we had dropped, in 2012 it had dropped to 2. In 2016, the instructional supply budget, that's textbooks and stuff like that, for Groton Dunstable Regional School District was the 14th lowest in the state. In 2016, our technical support, our technology support, even though we were increasing the number of devices that we were having across the district more and more each day, that was cut. And the counselor to student ratio at Florence Roach was 1 to 540, and at the high school it was 1 to 289, significantly above what the recommendations are. Next slide. So where are we now? We are just about full staffed. That's assuming that Florence Roach isn't open yet. So with the old Florence Roach building, we've had the reading interventionists at a level that we were able to go from 64% of our students needing reading intervention to 21%. That happened after COVID. We have certified librarians across the district. They teach students as well as run the libraries. We have K through 4 ELA coordinators. I'm sure a lot of you have been reading recently in the paper that early literacy is a big topic right now. Our accountability rating is that substantial progress towards targets and no intervention is needed by the state. The tech support still remains at 4, and we have 7,000 devices across the district. And the counselor ratios are there. Next slide. So where are we going? This presentation, I'm just going to very briefly touch on what would happen if the override does not pass. These are the targets that we just talked about. The central office target actually has been increased to 1.4. The high school target is just below 700,000. The middle school target is just above 700,000. The Floro target, and we did these enrollments by what they are today, not what they're going to be in the fall, is 519,000, and Swallow Union 316,000. That's what they have to cut. We talked about this. 75 to 80% of their budget is staffing. That is basically all they have to cut. Next slide. These are some of the impacts. What does this mean to every student that goes across the district? We expect that high school class sizes will be between 30 and 31. We expect that middle school class sizes will be between 30 and 31, that there will be significant reduction at the elementary levels for support. So that means 50 to 60 kids are not going to get reading support. They're not going to get math support. There's going to be significant reductions in behavioral and social emotional support. Next slide. Athletic fees right now, the high school is projecting that they would have to raise athletic fees to $700. The activity fees for things like chorus and the chamber choir would go to $400. And fees at this level are not consistent with the 10 schools that we compare ourselves to. So this would put us we're at the top of the market basket right now. This would put us off the charts in terms of our market basket. Next slide. What about high need students? There'll be a decrease in special education team chairs. Those were 2 of the central office cuts. That means that if someone is looking to get a meeting set up regarding their special education student, you're going to get 1 meeting a year because we're not going to have the ability to do any more than that. We're going to have bigger groups for related service providers, speech language pathologists, OTs, PTs. We're going to have special education teachers working with students in bigger groups. And our EL staffing is coming very close to non-compliance. We had 21 ELL students. Those are English language learners when I first came to the district 7 years ago, and now we have 41. Next slide. Technology support. If we can't get if we have to cut a technologist, and that's again another one of the cuts at the district level, then that means 7,000 devices are now being supported by 3 people instead of 4 people. So that means if a teacher's device goes down, it's going to take a long time to get it repaired. If a student's device goes down in the classroom, they may have to use pencil and paper and not be able to use a Chromebook. When we look at our maintenance support of our buildings, if a boiler goes down, now hopefully we won't have this problem with the new building, but I've literally had to have a maintenance person sit by the boiler in Florence Roach and make sure it stayed on until the repair person showed up. And decrease in the administrative staffing is outlined there. Next slide. Unfortunately, this impact is not just going to be for FY25. It goes on, as you've heard from everybody else, for FY26 and FY27. And we're talking about, over those 2 years, a cut of about 20 personnel, 10 each year. Next slide. And these are the upcoming dates. And I'm going to stop talking. And you've heard enough from everybody else, and this is your opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to turn the meeting back to Ron.
Okay, so that we can kind of do this in an organized fashion and hopefully get everybody's question answered, Jason is going to lead the discussion here tonight. What I ask is there is a microphone in the middle aisle here. Please come up, tell us your name and where you live, and proceed with your question. And Jason is here to answer the questions on Dunstable's behalf, and Mark Haddad on Groton's behalf, and the executive leadership team from Groton Dunstable School District and the school committee are here as well to participate in that discussion and answer those questions. So, with that being said, Mr. Jason?
We may chime in too, because that's more fun. So.
Yeah, just do it like town meeting. If you have a question, go right up to the mic and fire away. And then someone from the panel will do their best to answer.
Yeah. Just make sure you tell us what town you're coming from, because we do have both towns here.
I have many, many questions, but I'm going to start with two and give some other folks a chance to talk. But first, and I know it's been brought up in other meetings that I've attended, you talk about the towns that you use for your market basket. Many are considered the wealthy towns with a much larger tax base. For example, Acton-Boxborough has a tax base of $8 billion, while Groton Dunstable has a total tax base of $3.5 billion. They have 5,100 students compared to our 2,300. Westford has a $5 billion tax base and almost 5,000 students. Also, if you go onto Mass EDU, the towns that they use and they consider comparable, there's maybe two of the ones that you use, and then they're using other towns that they consider comparable as far as tax base, number of students, things like that. And you talk about, as far as median income, we align with those towns, but what you're missing is they have a lot more members with that median income than Dunstable, which I would consider to be a problem. Also, again, mentioned in many meetings, is that the chapter funding has been stagnant. So if you go on to mass.gov, you can actually see per pupil, because it doesn't seem like your slides are including the enrollment changes. You can see that both the foundation budget per pupil, the Chapter 70 budget per pupil, and our local piece of it has all gone up almost every year. And if you look at the foundation cost per pupil and that Chapter 70 per pupil, you use Littleton and Linfield in your Groton Dunstable by the numbers presentation to show what a big difference there was between ours and theirs. However, if you look at Littleton and Linfield for those examples, sorry, I'm losing my place here. From 2018 to 2024, Littleton received $3,107 more per pupil in the foundation and Chapter 70. $3,107. We actually received $3,244 more per pupil. So we actually got more than Littleton. Westwood was another one that you used. They actually got slightly more. They got $3,736 per pupil.
Why don't we, who wants to take the question on how you develop
I can do that.
I think we have a lot of questions, so I know Eric.
That's what I'm saying. I wanted to just start with those two because they were significant.
Yeah. So, I'll get the slide up there in a minute, but just to answer the question. The market basket was determined my first year here. It was a process that had started before I came on board. The district started with 100 school districts that were identified by the process that you're talking about, which is DART, okay, District Allocation of Resource, something, I don't know what the T stands for, DART. So 100 districts were identified by the DART tool, which comes from DESE. From that, school districts were removed that were more than 50 miles away. The rationale for that, again, done before I got here, the rationale for that was because if they were going to be doing something great, we would want to go and visit them. So anything that was more than 50 miles away was taken off the list. Then we looked at what the MCAS scores were to make sure that they were within one standard deviation for MCAS scores. We also looked at their per pupil expenditure to make sure that that was at least one standard deviation. They looked at their per pupil to teacher ratio. There were Dr. Novak did this. She looked at 15 or 16 or 17 different criteria and brought the list down to 10. That list of 10, and my understanding this was done because sometimes we were being compared compared against what we call the W districts, Wellesley, Rentham, et cetera, and sometimes we were being compared against Littleton. It depended on who was talking and who was doing the comparisons. So the school committee decided that they would go through this process. They came up with 10 towns. They actually voted that that would be the market basket that they would continue to ask us to be comparing ourselves to, and that's what we've done for the last couple years. I know that Chapter 70 can be confusing, but the Chapter 70 from up until recently, except with the exception of the FY23 year, which went up 1%, Chapter 70, 1.25%. Other than that, it's been below 1%. At the same time, Littleton's Chapter 70 went up 5.85%. Linfield's Chapter 70 went up 6.4%. Westwood's Chapter 70 went up 4.96%, and Bedford's Chapter 70 went up 3.53%. While that doesn't sound like a lot of money, every bit counts. $70,000 that Sherry's talking about is basically a teacher's salary. So if we get $70,000, it doesn't cover their benefits, but it will cover a brand new teacher's salary. So just every time you see $70,000, think of that as a second grade teacher.
Thank you. Sir?
Hi, Pavel Honzinski, 61 Parkhurst in Dunstable. So I'm a relative newcomer to Dunstable, and so maybe my experience is not that broad. I've been here for only 32 years, and this is the first time when you guys really came out with information so that if anybody feels uninformed, shame on them, because it's everywhere and it's very well explained. Thank you for that. That's a great effort. What I wanted to ask are two specific things. When we're talking about 3 overrides, 3 years, that is going to be done every year for next 3 years. Right? It's not one vote this year for the next 3 years.
No, it is. No, it is. It's one vote this year, and the allocation changes this year, next year, and the following.
All right. So that wasn't
Raise the levy limit.
Okay. So single vote affects all 3 years.
Correct.
And does that mean that there cannot be an override in 27 again?
There could be.
There could be.
Yeah, I mean, it's if something were to change within the budget, or if you need some other type of allocation for XYZ, some unplanned, unforeseen expense,
Right.
you could be faced with another override in the future.
Okay, good to know. And the other issue, now this is not that I'm arguing for or against. Okay, it's just a issue that I've noticed, and that is that last year, the consequences of not passing the override were very well explained. Everybody knew. We're going to cut one policeman, we're going to cut one fireman. So what is the logic of putting that back in, even though it was rejected last year, and therefore risking everything else?
Sure.
Right?
Wait, hold on a second. Let him answer that.
Well,
Because we
Just
think
asking.
it's unsafe at the current staffing levels. It's as simple as that. We have one police officer on at night to respond to critical emergencies, and it's not safe for the residents, the community, or the police officer responding. Same with the firefighters. There's one firefighter on during the days, right? Well, there's 2 right now, but because someone donated funds to have to. But if we were at one for a short period of time, and one firefighter responding to a fire can literally do nothing. So it's simply a safety issue, and I don't want to go on too long because we want to hear from you, but we did get I got a phone call from someone saying that, well, you really should look at volume of calls and make the case based on the volume of calls on why you need to restore these positions. And under normal circumstances, I would agree with that. I think that's a sound basis for looking to increase staffing in public safety. However, we're not at minimum standards at this point. So it's not, we can't even base our decisions on volume of calls. In my view, one person overnight cannot adequately respond to an emergency, and one person in the fire station during the day cannot adequately respond to an emergency. And we have seen the consequences and will continue to see the consequences. It's not when, it's not if, it's when. There's no question in my mind.
So my question was not about the fact that we need it, right? Because that's a different discussion. My question was, it was rejected by the town voters last year.
Correct.
And by rolling it to the right, as part of this 3-year override, we're really risking not getting the override in many people's minds based on that single issue. Because they will say, well, we already said no, and now we're being forced to say yes. You know, it's almost like, so it's a concern that I have, that it muddies the water. It's not well explained. That one is not well explained.
So one of the things that I think the select board and Jason has done very well is they're trying to understand what the community wants, right? As a big part of this is understanding, you know, do you want a strong school system? Do you want a safe environment to live in? One of the things that they did was they went out and provided the survey to the townspeople. Everyone had the opportunity to fill that out on the website and go through the whole process to be able to do that. And what came back overwhelmingly was basically those two things, that they want a safe, you know, public safety is a major concern for all the townspeople, which it should be, right? And then fall closely behind that was education, with making sure they want to have a good education system. Obviously, a lot of things are based upon that, property values, et cetera, plus the education of our own students, which is obviously our own children. That's one of the major things that we want to have there. So the decision, you know, between all the boards to come together and decide that we wanted to put this police officer and firefighter back into the budget is that we're listening to the town. So we asked for public comment, and public comment came back and said, we want public safety. It's one of the major things that we're concerned about. And I have to echo what Jason mentioned earlier, which is that one police officer showing up to any sort of situation is, in my mind, is unacceptable. It's dangerous for everybody involved. Because if you're someone who's trying to respond to an emergency situation and you're by yourself and showing up to what could be 1, 2, 5 different people involved in a situation, you're going to be in a very defensive position, and it's going to make you respond differently than what you would want, right? Than anybody would want in a situation where you're dialing 911, you're asking for help, and you get one person. Imagine, you know, and as to what Jason was saying, you call 911 as your house is on fire, and you have one firefighter show up.
They can't actually.
They can't even actually go into your house by
same,
law.
And same, so if you want to go a little farther into it, it's
Yep. So I think it's actually
it's in the presentation, but we didn't get too far into the weeds because we would be boring you all
We'd still be
until
going.
sleep.
It is in the slide.
Yes.
All of what he said is actually in one of the slides that I reviewed. I was just trying to, I went on too long to begin with, so I was trying to go fast, but.
Yep.
It's
on the website.
It's coming. Yep. We're trying to share information through all our communication channels in digestible sound bites.
Yeah.
So that you can understand, like, this is the revenue, this is the, so you will get pieces that say, to explain why you're seeing some of the changes within the FY25 budget, including that one. You will get that information.
It's on
It
the
was
front
on the
page
front
of the-
page of the newsletter that was sent out, if you received that. Everyone should have received one.
Yeah, it's on the, yes.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. I'm Judith Taylor. I live on Lower Dam Way in Dunstable. I am new to town. I've been here for almost a year, and I'm really looking forward to spending a lot more years here. And so I am very concerned about these numbers because, as you pointed out, 3 years down the road, I could see us all here again having the same discussion. And I've done a lot of budgeting myself in my professional life, and I thank all of you for all the work you put in, because I know how much work it is, and I know it's not fun at all. But I guess the main question I have, especially on the school budget, is why are we starting with this level services as a beginning point? I mean, it's obviously something to look at. But when you have a budget deficit that's this big and that continues on, it's 4 to 6% a year, and we can only raise the budget 2.5% plus new growth, right? This is gonna continue. This is not the end game. This is not gonna solve our problems at all. So I really think we have to go back several steps and ask or question everything. Basically, why are we doing certain things? One example that I found out, I guess Boutwell School is something that is part of the regional school district. I didn't know that because I just got here. Why are we funding pre-K?
Can I, if that's quick, that's a
Sure.
quick question.
And just as a tag onto that, why would we even think of reducing kindergarten fee or, phasing out those fees when we've got big budget deficits like that? Why would we even have that discussion? So that's where I'm a little bit confused.
Those are two great questions. The first question is, we're required by law to provide special education programming for students in, as soon as they reach 2.5 or 3, I forget the exact number. So we're required by law to have a preschool. For special education students, we open up that preschool to typical peers because it's the best environment for most students. We also collect fees. There's a cost that's associated with those families that come. So we're going to be required to educate any special education student that's of that age through a process that's called Child Find. So there's no choice about having a preschool or not. Every town has to have a preschool. So that answers that question. But we do open it up to typical peers because when we do that, generally that helps us to offset some of the costs that are associated with it. In terms of the kindergarten fee, I'm sure that there are people on the school committee that also have a passion for this, so I'm going to certainly let them speak, but I will tell you that there's 362 school districts in the state of Massachusetts, and some number that it's in the single digits still charge for full-day kindergarten. We have the highest charge. However, as part of the budget process this year, instead of making a significant reduction in the fee for kindergarten, we went with a smaller reduction, but I'm going to turn the mic over if anybody from school committee wants to address that.
I don't have all the kindergarten figures in my head or in front of me here tonight to speak to that, but I will say to one significant reason why it was important to me, a couple of reasons, to reduce the kindergarten fee is that approximately 98% of students within the state of Massachusetts receive free full-day kindergarten. We are among the 2% of the communities within the state of Massachusetts that charge for full-day kindergarten. We, until recently, were charging the highest fee across the entire state. It was $5,000 per student. Other districts that do charge, among the 2%, are charging $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. And one of the key factors in that for me, individually, as a member of the school committee, is that part of the revenue from our fees that we're collecting from our general education students is paying for the cost of special education students. So special education, and I don't want to step on your toes, Laura, if I say anything incorrect. There are some special education students, due to the nature of their IEP, that qualify for free full-day kindergarten, okay? And so some of the fees that we're collecting, someone who lives in one of our two communities, they pay their property taxes. In return for that, they get municipal services, they get public schools. Then they turn around and pay for full-day kindergarten, and part of their full-day kindergarten is paying for the special education students. And for me, fundamentally, that was wrong. And so that's why I lobbied and advocated amongst the school committee, which voted as a whole to reduce the kindergarten fees over the next 3 years.
I just want to add about the level service question, because I think that is a good question. I don't. Well, I mean, we don't start there. And I think throughout the year, we're looking to do better than level service, to be honest with you, budgetarily at least.
From the municipal side, you're speaking.
On the Town of Dunstable side. And just this fiscal year, which is we got 4 months left, but just this fiscal year, we've regionalized two departments, and we're going to a regional dispatch at the beginning of next fiscal year. So we're constantly, every day, I'm thinking of ways to try to save money for the town.
And I just want to say, Jason, you've done a fabulous job. I mean, honestly, I am super impressed from the municipal standpoint of Dunstable, what you guys have done to save money and to regionalize and share costs. You have done a bang-up job.
Thank you.
Truly.
It's truly thanks to Jason's work, having Jim Skaggs work as the town manager. It's a priceless resource to have good leadership within the administrative and manager role in these positions.
The other question you asked was about level services. Let me address that. So the level services budget that we developed this year that we're talking about was based on a budget where we cut $1.9 million last year. So when we're talking about levels, you're asking why would we, last year we cut $1.9 million off the budget. The level services budget we are developing this year is based off of that budget as last year. So last year it was not level services in the sense that we cut $1.9 million out of the budget last year to hopefully be a last gasp attempt. Every year that I've been here, we've been using more excess and deficiency. So the towns talk about free cash. We use what's called excess and deficiency, same thing, right? It's the money that's left over at the end of the year. Actually, most of our money that's free cash came from money we're getting reimbursed from the MSBA that we paid out for the feasibility study for the new school. A lot of the money came from there. Or it would come from, we expected an increase to be in something to be 10%, and it only turned out to be 8%. All that money goes into efficiency. My first year here, we used $100,000 of E&D. Last year, we used $911,000 worth of E&D. So that reduces the assessments that the towns have. And so last year's budget, for which this level of services budget is based off, is a budget that was almost $2 million than it was less the year before.
Hi, Charlie Lippman, live on Dogwood Lane in Dunstable. I guess my question is more for the Board of Selectmen. So our costs are forever going to outrun 2.5% ad nauseum, I think, because they're mostly employee costs and healthcare costs, and like I work in budgeting and finance as well. Same problem, same stuff. Are there any discussions at the state level or with our state representatives in regards to 2.5 doesn't work? The money's not there. This issue is pervasive across all these towns. I have friends who work in schools in a number of towns, surrounding towns. This is more of a state issue because every town's dealing with these issues, and we can argue about can we do it or our property values, and we can do this circle. But this is a state problem, and what discussions are happening that you're aware of at that level?
So I can speak to some of that. Prop 2.5 came in late 1970s, 1980, and over time it worked quite well. But as time has gone on, the functionality of it is that it has put a significant number of towns in a position where they need overrides to support their budget. And so is it being looked at the state? It is. And I think I've lost perspective. Maybe about 6 or 7 weeks ago, the Lieutenant Governor was here, Dunstable Town Hall, and we had that discussion with her about it. But it's going to take a significant effort to move that off 2.5 to some other number, and it's not going to bring us any relief. But it is absolutely a front burner issue that is being talked about at the state level. If you watch the news, there's some discussion about ratcheting up motor vehicle excise taxes, which is kind of, those taxes come directly to the town. And there's talk about ratcheting those taxes up just to give it some relief. But it is absolutely something that is being discussed about at the state level. When it gets fixed and how it gets fixed, I wish I could answer that. But at this point in time, I think it's probably fair to say, and Groton would probably agree with me, that Proposition 2.5 has become dysfunctional. And it's put us in a really bad position, but it is being looked at, and there is talk about it at Beacon Hill to change it.
Even a couple weeks ago, your different groups of leaders here met with Scarsdale, Cena, Cronin, and Kennedy. So that's your 2 senators and your 2 reps, and they agreed, echoing Ron's point that we have a systemic issue here, but I like that they're working on something, but we know it takes a little while to get a slow-moving rock down a hill. Like, this isn't going to help us next year. We are looking at a plan that maybe come to fruition a handful of years from now. Because I think, as you saw from the list of towns that are facing this issue, there'll be more next year. So, like, we're trying to solve, 1 to 3 year problem this year to hopefully stem the tide for years to come.
My question is, my name is Dawn Dorr, and I live on Lowell Street, and mine's towards the school district, because I do have a child in special ed who I paid for full-day kindergarten for, sir. But are we part of this?
I didn't say all students. I said some students for special education fall for that. I did not.
Well, the way you worded it was very offensive.
Some do, okay?
Are we part of the circuit breaker program through this DECA state that will help refund us part of 75% of our special education funds
And I'll say
per
I have
student?
one child who's special education, okay? So I do not criticize that.
To answer your question, every school district in the state of Massachusetts receives some amount of special education funding through circuit breaker.
Okay.
But every year, there's a thing called extraordinary relief. So last year, or 2 years ago, no, last year, out-of-district placements went up 14.5%, and we projected 5%, between 4.5% and 5%, because that's usually what we get. Every school district in Massachusetts put in for extraordinary relief. I personally have never met a school district superintendent who has been given extraordinary relief, which is that supposedly that extra money that's left at the end.
Right, because it says you're supposed to apply for it in March, or then again in May.
Yes, we apply for it regularly, every year, and we've never gotten anything, and I have never met, and it doesn't make any difference which school, if you're talking about Westford, if you're talking about Chelmsford, if you're talking about Littleton, if you're talking about Northern Middlesex, if you're talking about Greater Lowell Tech, I've talked to all those superintendents. No one's ever gotten a dime.
Thank you.
We get almost $1.5 million a year.
For circuit breaker?
Yeah,
Yeah.
which offsets our out-of-district
Yeah,
placements.
so we get $1.5 million a year, Sherry's telling me, in circuit breaker money.
Hi, my name is Phil Manassi. I live on Parker Street down here in Dunstable. Going to the FTE slide, it looked like the only position that increased a lot over the last few years were the paraprofessionals by about 20 positions. What's the definition of that?
Sure, great question. So paraprofessionals are the unsung heroes of the school district. They are people that work with our most students who really need to have either a 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 or 1 to 1s depending on the student. So they are people that are not certified teachers, but they work under the direction of certified teachers to work directly with students who have very, very special needs. In this district, 99% of our paraprofessionals are associated with a specific student's individualized education plan. Other districts use them for other reasons. I've been in other districts where they've been used to cover the library. And as a matter of fact, in Groton Dunstable at one point when there was no certified librarians, they were covered by paraprofessionals. And that is what we will have to go to in the libraries and in our technology labs if the override doesn't pass.
Great, and the FTE slide was great, but it would be also great to see average salaries and total salaries by category as well.
Sure.
I saw 15 administrators up there. I'd love to know what the average salary is, the total salaries for those. I know when you look at school costs, over the United States over the last 20, 30 years, that's the biggest driver, it seems. So I'm just kind of curious about that. I moved to town about 5 years ago. To say our taxes have gone up is an understatement. To say how much they're going up, to see them going up again these next few years is quite shocking. We have 2 young kids. We hope to have more. This, kind of puts a strain on us, and I'm sure we're not the only one as a young family, and a lot of elderly in the town as well that are on fixed incomes. I work in accounting and finance. I've been a CPA for 15 years. I've done auditing. I've been audited. There's 2 sides of the equation. There's revenue and there's expense. It seems like we're talking a lot about revenues tonight and not a lot about expenses. And I think that needs to be talked about. And I think starting the budgeting process from square one is a great idea.
So on this slide, which is on our website, and this is just one of 95 slides, and it's too much, I know. But this slide shows you that the percentage of the budget that's spent on central office administration and building administration compared to the other districts we compare ourselves to, you'll see that 3% of our budget is spent on the people that you're talking about compared to the other districts we are here. We're right in line, we're in the median, if not, and I think Westford's the only one that's less, that's 2%, and that's because they charge off their assistant principals to special education, so it shows up in their special education line item. If I was to go through, you'd see the percentage of the budget that each job category is spent on. There's also slides that are here that if I went through, you'd see what our average salary is for each of those positions. So an elementary principal, how does that stack up to these 10 districts? If the only person that's above the median is the special education director, she's been a special education director for like 20 years, so she's slightly above the median when we compare ourselves against the other 10 districts, but we have people that are in like the bottom 1 or 2 for their salaries. So their salaries are all here. 2022 is the most recent data that's available through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I keep checking every day to see if they put up 2023, but as of right now, 2022 is the most recent data. So if this is on our website, and if there's specific slides that you'd like to see and you don't want to have to go through all 95, just email me and I'll send you the slides.
Okay, great. And I just want to throw out one more point. I'm a controller for a company that employs over 300 people. We froze salaries this year. We laid off 30% of our workforce. It's tough out there. It's struggling. To see $2 million in salary increases up there, it's shocking. So I just want to throw that out there. So appreciate the time. Thank you.
Just so you know, that represents 337 people, and the average increase of COLA is between that we're in the process of negotiations, but one of the problems that you saw up there is that the market for, someone asked about paraprofessionals, and I talked about that. Yep. The market for paraprofessionals, the market rate for paraprofessionals has skyrocketed over the last year. About a year ago, it started in Woburn, was the first district. Since then, across the state, paraprofessional increases have been significantly higher than we expected, and that's what's reflected in that. Also, teacher salaries increases. When I first started working here, salary increases usually in negotiations was about 2.5%. That number has also significantly risen, so that's where that comes from.
Yeah, no, and I understand COLA, but like I said, we froze our COLA increases this year.
Is that going to help or hurt your business in retaining quality employees?
We wouldn't have cash at the end of the day if we didn't, so the business wouldn't be in existence. So there you go.
A couple of additional things. We're part of the collective bargaining agreement. So you may have noticed in the news that you've seen that a number of districts have gone on strike, even though it's illegal, and have set the tone for how we negotiate with our teachers in our collective bargaining agreements. We're currently in the midst of collective bargaining, and we understand the pressure and the push to reduce benefits. And certainly we're having conversations around what we can do in a district. It is not an easy conversation, and especially given the tone of the strikes that have gone around the state. Additionally, as a CPA, you might appreciate the budget book that was recently released and is online as well.
Thank you. Sir.
Hi, everybody. Mike Newcomb. I live on Alexander Way in Dunstable. Before I say anything, I just want to thank the 20-something people at this table. I know you guys have thankless jobs. I know you've worked very hard on everything, no matter what anybody's opinion is. I know everybody at that table is trying to do the best they can for these two towns and for these kids. I appreciate it. I think we all appreciate it, too, and I know it's a tough spot. There's not a lot of money to go around. And as the gentleman before me said, it's tough everywhere. It's not just Dunstable or Groton. It's XYZ company. It's Joe Schmo who doesn't have a job, whatever it is. That being said, there's only so much money to go around. And Dunstable's already, I'm kind of a numbers guy. I've been involved in collective bargaining. I'm actually in collective bargaining with my own job right now myself, so I understand the challenges. But right now, among the 30 most comparable towns in Massachusetts, Dunstable has the highest average tax bill of all of them in the entire state. And if you expand that to the 95 towns that have budgets under $25 million, we're number 4. So when the school department gets up and says, they're at the top of their market basket, and if this doesn't go through, they might have to go beyond that. We're already there. The entire town's already there. So it's tough to resonate when you say that, and then you say it's level services, but I see in the last 2 years you've added 20 positions and you have over $2 million in new salaries on the board. And I'm not anti-school, but the gentleman before me, like he said, you know, I know private industry is different than the government, but if there's only so much money, sometimes you got to freeze things, sometimes you got to cut things. I understand about the illegal teacher strikes, but then that's not right. But as someone who likes this town and wants to stay in this town, it's challenging to see these sort of things happen and say, is this where my money should be going? Like those numbers, we're already at the top of everything. There's only one town in the entire, well, I'm sorry, not in the entire state, one town out of those 30 communities I mentioned that gives more of its annual budget to the school department. And it's out in Western Mass, but we give the second highest contribution from our municipal budget to the town. I mean, to the schools. I think Jason and the town have done an unbelievable job about doing what they can with every penny on the municipal side. I personally, based on all the numbers and all the slides, and I love all the data that we've been getting out, I think everybody's doing a great job getting it out. I don't see the schools doing their part to reduce their 65%, but I see the town really busting its ass on it. Now, my only question, or one of my only questions is, we have a 3-year projection here of $2.1 million shortfall. There's a 5-year projection apparently already in place. Where are we at in fiscal 28?
So I'll let Laura speak to the 20 positions, but I'm going to speak to level services. So we have provided a quality education in our town for a number of years, longer than I've been here, and I've been in Groton for a little over 20. Those level services put us in the median of our market baskets as far as MCAS scores, cost per pupil, the variety of different services that we offer. We can choose as a community to do something less for our students. We can do a socio-education, or we can pull $50 out of our pocket and decide, that let's see what $50 worth gets us of education. Or we can provide what we have provided, what the community has expected, and what I receive emails about, and everyone receives emails about, they expect for their children. Now, at any point, if the community decides that they want a socio-education, or they want kids that don't meet certain MCAS scores to prepare them for college or for a 21st century education, then if that's what the community decides that they want, then unfortunately that's what we as a community will have to provide. But at this point, we are educating our kids to the level and to the scores and to the expectations to prepare our kids in the best way we can for college, for vocation, for the next steps that they decide to take. So when you say, well, we need to cut it back, what is the benchmark that we're going to set? We're going to get X amount of kids that don't meet the benchmark of MCAS. Are we going to, X amount of kids go back on intervention and need interventionist services? I mean, what is the benchmark that we choose for the success of our children, right? And right now, we are ensuring the majority of our students are successful. And to me, that's what an education is about. We want to ensure that 100% of our students are successful. We're unable to do that. It's almost an impossibility, and no amount of money will allow us to meet that success. But we're doing a pretty good job of making sure that as many of our students, the majority of our students, a great number of our students are meeting expectations according to the state standards, according to our community standards, and not failing. So at any point, I don't know what benchmark people want us to set. I've heard this conversation so many times, and I don't know what to say to it. It's literally like people come up to us and say, well, I'm not happy with 5.5, or not happy with 3.9. I'm okay with 2. How much will $2 million buy us of education? And that's not how we educate our kids.
So my only, My only, I'm sorry, do you want me to respond to her?
No, go ahead.
My only stance with that is, like I said, we are paying the second most amount of money among comparable communities for our schools. So if, I'm sorry?
In Dunstable, right?
In Dunstable, yes. We're paying we're contributing the second most amount of money that any town contributes to its schools based on how much money we have and all that. So with that funding that we're already giving you're saying it's still not enough. We need more to be good? Is it
more to make sure that our kids are as successful as possible
Why?
to meet the community's expectations.
Why are the other 29 communities of similar size, not size, but of similar funding, able to do it for less money?
I think that the nuance of community to community is very specific, and you cannot sit there and have a conversation that says that if our neighbor is doing it, then obviously we can do it. Because the demographics, the size of the community, the level of services that are provided to them, the level of enrichment. There's so many nuances to an education and a community that you can just not easily take this guy over here and this guy over here and says, well, how they're doing it, how come we can't? Right? It's not like that. That's why we chose market baskets, because we went through those 15 different things that we felt like honed in and said that this is who we want to be, this is what we are, this is what we have been for as long as I have been here, and this is what the community expects of us to provide. So that's what we have done. Now, at any point, like I say, you want to go, I want to be like that guy over there, and I only want to pay $1 for my education instead of $2 or $50 or whatever it is, then that's a conversation I guess we have to have as a community or as communities, the two of us. But at this point, we're providing the level of service that has been expected of us for as long as I have been in this community, and that's the level of education that we are providing. And that comes at a cost that is inflating, a cost that gets more expensive every year, and a cost that includes a lot of regulations and requirements over the last 20 years that DESE and other people have put upon us that we have to meet.
Sure. Thank you.
So I wanted to just thank you. I think you had asked a lot of really good questions. I'm going to speak to just one of them about the 20, how did we add 20 new positions while still saying we're offering level services? So this is a question I've heard before, and it's a good one. And I think that the easiest way to explain it is that there are certain services that we have to provide by law. And so depending on, we could get new students that come into the district and they require services that we already provide to other students, but we need to hire additional staffing for that because there's an increased number of students that need it. So it's the difference between saying, okay, we're going to start a new STEM program at the high school. It's brand new, we don't have it, we want it, it's exciting. That would be offering like a totally new service versus we need to hire additional staffing to provide what we have to legally for our new student body. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that point, is how can we be adding new positions and still claiming level services? It is level services, it's just that we need additional staffing to provide it because there's an increased need for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to get up to explain. So in terms of the positions, some of the positions that you saw, we used to fund through, because we actually couldn't fill the position. So say we have X amount of students that need speech language services, and then we get more students that need that. Over the last couple of years, we have not actually been able to hire the people that we need to do that. So we've been using what we call contract services. So contracting out to an agency is significantly more expensive. So several of the positions that you see, I think it was like 6 or 7 of them, have to do with people that we couldn't bring on board before because we couldn't find those people and we were paying contract services, which is much more expensive, and now we're doing those in-house. 10 of the positions that you were talking for go back to the gentleman's question about paraprofessionals. So paraprofessionals, again, in this district are only used for special education. So if a student has in their individualized education plan that they need to be in either a 1-to-1 or 1-to-3, 1-to-4, 1-to-5, no matter what they say, what it says in their education plan, that's what we follow, then we have to hire more paraprofessionals. So that's where 10 of those positions came from. In addition, 3 of the positions, and this goes back to what Lacey was just talking about. So we used to have 27 ELL students, now we have 41. We need an additional ELL teacher. That's part of the numbers. Due to COVID, we have a lot of kids in first grade that didn't go to preschool because at that time people were choosing, and I can certainly understand that, to keep their children home, and they did not send them to preschool. But that provides them with a kind of a disadvantage when they get into school because they haven't had that preschool experience, and now we bring them into kindergarten. Well, kindergarten today is not like what you and I went to. Well, actually, I will tell you the truth, I didn't go to kindergarten because they didn't have kindergarten when I was a kid, not in a public school anyway. But I will tell you that kindergarten today, students are expected to be able to read by the end of a lot of reading ability by the end of kindergarten. So if they didn't have preschool and then they came into kindergarten, that was their first formal school experience. Now they're going into first grade. There's going to be issues. There are going to be kids that are dysregulated, kids that are challenged by behavior at school. That's why there's a behavior interventionist. We have that for special education students. We don't have that for general education students. It's the same service. Every kid needs to get that service. That's where another one of those positions come from. So basically what Lacey's talking about, we're not adding a STEM program as much as I would love to have STEM because that's my background. We're not adding any other programs. We're just hiring people so we can provide every student with the same service that every other student gets. It is getting expensive. You are right, 75 to 80% of the budget comes from salaries. Salaries are going up. Health insurance is going up. Dental insurance is going up. That's a problem. It's a challenge. I totally understand where you're coming from. It's a challenge that we talk to the state representatives, we talk to the lieutenant governor. I'm not sure, other than cutting the positions, and it's not a threat, but if we don't have the money, then we have no choice to cut positions. And this is where it gets really dicey as the superintendent of 2,340 kids, depending on the day. Sometimes it's, kids move in and kids move out. But the ones that are the guaranteed services by law, those are things I can't walk away from. So the only thing I can walk away from are those services that are not required by law, and that means everybody suffers.
Thank you.
To be clear, I'm not suggesting we are adding a STEM program. Just to be clear. We're not doing that.
I'd just like to address one of your points that you had made about how we compare to other communities. We can compare ourselves. There are 350 in Massachusetts. You can pick different groups to make different arguments. What I will say is that as part of the working group process that happened with your select board, between your select board and the school committee back over the summer, they selected a number of different communities. There were about 10 of them. And I will say that, yes, it is correct that Dunstable does have the third highest tax bill on that list amongst those communities in terms of the absolute value of the tax bill. However, when you do measure it as a percentage of median income, Dunstable is actually third to the lowest. So when you look at its ability to pay, assuming that you believe that's based on median income, it actually has the third to the lowest. And as a matter of fact, it's even lower than Groton by a small percentage point. And that's in the school committee's November newsletter that's published on the district's website if anyone wants to see any additional information. And I'll just say one real quick final thing. The gentleman, I forget where he went here, the Groton Dunstable sweater on, asked the right question, that the state funding really is the problem here. We need to get more money from the state. Otherwise, local revenue is going to have to go up faster than the rate of our budgets, or we're never going to get there. So yes, that is the problem.
Thank you.
Jason, one final thing. Just wanted to, it's so in 2028, obviously. So a couple different things. One of the points there that was discussed is part of the median income, right? One of the biggest things that we're dealing with when it comes to state funding and sort of dealing with some of our state representatives is legitimately, when you look at what our town median income is much larger than a lot of the rest of the representatives district, right? So when we as a town come in and say that we can't afford things with a median household income north of $200,000, and yes, that is Dunstable's. The last time we checked was $211,000 was our household median income. So that is Dunstable, right? So that's where we line up when it comes to requesting funding and looking for things. we do have some challenges there. As far as 2028 is concerned, I think Jason, when he opened up his presentation, was talking about the different things that the Board of Selectmen as well as the town administrator is going through, is trying to find new ways to produce additional income. As we've talked about our expenses, we want to talk about different incomes. We've developed three different avenues to try to find new and inventive ways to create revenue to come in. We're hopeful that that offsets some of the projections for 2028. But, you know, those are things that we're going to have to those are challenges we'll have to meet when we get there. It all depends on how much our expenses are, right? We've seen what we're trying to do with expenses, you know, locally here within what we can control. And I think Jason's been doing an outstanding job to be able to do that and control those budgetary numbers. But realistically, that's not all of our budget. So it all depends on what those expenses look like in 2028. We're very hopeful that some of these other boards and other volunteer members that, you know, that are out there looking for other ways and inventive ways to bring business to our town to try to offset. But that is definitely, as far as the saving grace is concerned, we'd have to open up a strip mall with about 150 stores, and we'd all have to shop at all of them to be able to sustain that sort of thing. So it is definitely a large challenge in front of us, but we're definitely not sitting idle, like waiting for that to happen. There's a lot of things going on to try to offset that. So I appreciate the question, and we are looking at it. Believe me, we understand this is 3 years, and then we have to see where things are at there. What happens next?
Yeah, no, like I said in the beginning, I appreciate all the way, from end to end, everybody at that table has done something. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir.
My name is Rob Foley. I'm from Groton, and you can take less time on this question for me, please. Thank you all for all the efforts that you've done. Simple question, really, to Dr. Chesson. In the reduction impact, one of the examples, you note that the class sizes could get, you know, up to 30 or 31. What number is that from? Like, what is it currently, so that we have an understanding of, like, what kind of change that would be? Thank you.
At the middle school, currently, class sizes are about 24 to 25. And at the high school, class sizes, I think when we presented the last time, the median was like 20, so 20, 21, 22. So we're talking about a significant increase in class sizes. It also, at the high school particularly, would probably result in cutting of electives. At the middle school, it may have to require us to go away from the middle school T model that we have right now. So right now, the same group of 125 students has the same math teacher, science teacher, social studies teacher, language arts teacher. It sort of gives kids a transition from the elementary environment to the high school environment and prepares them for that. There's a whole bunch of research that shows that that's very beneficial. We may have to move away from that to minimize that impact on students. So yeah, it's pretty significant. You're welcome.
Thank you. Erica, do you mind if we
I'm being such a good daughter and being a stand-in. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Brian Flynn
Brian.
from Pleasant Street. I've got a different type of question. I pulled some statistics off the assessment, the assessor's database. And there are 3 houses here, and they happen to be in Kieran's neighborhood. 2 of them at least have sold recently. These houses were built in 2017, and they have appreciated their assessed value. One house by $240,300, another house by $361,300, another house by $348,800. Almost $1 million of appreciation in 3 houses over that time period. Now, my own house, I have a much longer record of. So from 1996 to 2006, my house appreciated $228,590. From 2006 to 2017, it actually went down in value $15,900. And then from 17 on, it's appreciated $191,000. Another house on Main Street, similar. 96-206, $188,000 of appreciation. From 06 to 17, zero appreciation. And in those periods, it's actually gone down different years. And then from 17 to now, $307,800. We all know that real estate spirals end. So if you can't make budgets now, when this spiral ends, what the hell are we going to do? Jump in the Salmon Brook? Because this is going to get exponentially worse if we don't get control of spending. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. That's my comment.
Hi, Sarah Axon, Main Street. I have a couple of questions. I don't necessarily think that I completely understand overrides. So if we had passed the override last year, if we had voted for it, would we need another override this year?
Yes.
And then basically another override the year after?
Well, yeah, this year's override is for 3 years of budgetary forecasting and purposes.
So it's a 2.5% override. So last year it would have been so the budget increases by 2.5% every year, right?
Yes.
Without any override, and then you do an override.
Your tax assessment goes up 2.5% every year, based upon the state. The state allows for that. The state allows for that budgetary assessment or that growth on an annual basis. What we're saying is that 2.5% doesn't cover the additional cost, right? So what we're looking at is, yes, last year we requested $300,000 that did not go through, and so if that were to go through, we'd still be back here tonight, just having a smaller discussion because of the assessment that we've received from the school district. So even if we passed last year's, we'd still be back because we're still offset by. You forgot the 300. We're still off by $400,000. We'd still be off by that much.
So just ask that the override would be less over the.
The override would be less, but
over
it would still be there for sure.
And it may have been you, and it may not have been you, but somebody from the finance committee had gone to one of the school committee meetings and said that, that this wasn't a surprise, that, you do often forecast 3 years. Mm-hmm. I kind of think that you forecast 5 years, sort of, in a fuzzy way, but you could see this coming. And so I think, I'm probably the sixth person to have mentioned this, but if we had passed the override last year and then passed the override this year with implications for the next 2 years, there's still a good chance at the end of that we're going to just have to keep doing it.
Based upon it's based upon the assessments that we receive, as we're trying to do everything we can municipally, unless there was some sort of driver to require us to change out something else we were doing within our municipal budget. The main driver right now, as it is the largest item of our budget, it would depend on the assessment from the school district as to whether or not we'd get to that point, unless there was something that happened within our community to drive something larger than that individually, which could happen. It just,
And I would say that back in, it was like early February of 2020, and this was as, the world was just getting ready to shut down.
Yeah.
We were literally having override discussions, like your select board, your advisory board, your school committee. We were all working to do what we're doing now, basically. But then the world just took a right turn, and we had planned for an override that coming spring town meeting, but then we had an economic world shutdown for whatever, I'm not going to get into the politics of COVID, but we had planned and we had begun the language and the discussion to get an override structured for the town, but then shit hit the fan, for lack of a better term. That's literally what happened, and it's taken us that many years to catch up and to get back to budget planning and get back to normal spending and trying to manage the budget within our confines, and we've exceeded that, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't the case, and I wish that
No,
didn't
I know, and
happen back in
I don't
2020.
know how to solve the problem, and
So-
and
Yeah.
I think, like everyone else has said, you've done an amazing job. But one of the things that you did mention is you did get ARPA money, so temporary COVID money, and I think that helped with a lot of things. And you did mention that you don't have that anymore, and you're not going to be able to use that to kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
On the school committee side, if you could address this, I brought it up a couple of times. The ARPA money that the school committee was given, talking about level services, you kept some of that ARPA money and then you put it into the budget, and then you made that part of your level services. If you can address that, and if we were talking about level services, I mean, people talk about rebuilding from the bottom up instead of maintaining level services. You know, what if we went back to the 2019 budget instead of the budget after COVID, which I think has had some COVID money put into it? And I just want to say one more thing to the, mostly to the chair. The comment that this last gentleman made, I think, was a very thoughtful comment, and I appreciate the answer. I just want to say, I think, from Faye, that wasn't exactly a fact-based answer, that response that he was getting back. It's not really that we're looking for a reduced level of education, quality of education. We're just looking to see if the money can be spent in a better way. So.
So you asked about ARPA money, and I think what you're referring to is that we used ARPA money. Actually, the vast majority of ARPA money was used to upgrade the HVAC systems in our schools, and to provide needlepoint ionization machines in every school and every classroom, and in the cafeterias and the common areas, so that students would be able to be healthy. And we did an excellent job. Our students went to school way more than many other schools across the state. So I'm really proud of what we did to do that. However, we did put in, after COVID, we also did testing with the ARPA money. So I'm going to address the people that we added. So we added 3 additional reading specialists. We added a math reading interventionist. We added a math interventionist, and we added social worker, guidance counselor. It was our fervent hope that we would be able to not need that level of assistance. But while we have made exceptional progress, and the team is great and the teachers are phenomenal, we still have students, as we just talked about. We have kids that are in first grade now that didn't have preschool. That has made, if you talk to teachers, they will tell you that the students that are in front of them are extraordinarily different than the students that were before. There are challenges in both academics and behavior. Until we get, and there was an article that I started my presentation last week talking about what the impact of the override would be. There was an article that was written by a teacher from another district, from the Concord-Carlisle School District, and he was talking about how the impact of COVID is way more far-reaching than we thought. So if we talk to people that are in the schools right now, you'll hear things about first grade students who are amazing and lovely, and we were happy to have them every single day, but they didn't go to preschool. And I know that doesn't seem like it makes a difference, but in this district particularly it does, because kids go to preschool, and most kids go to full-day kindergarten, and if they don't have that experience, then they're behind. And so we have kids in second grade that didn't have a normal kindergarten experience, and we have kids that are going to be graduating that didn't have a normal 8th grade and 9th grade experience. And we're going to be playing catch-up for years to come, and we unfortunately underestimated and thought we would be able to get rid of those positions, or at least when people retired or left us, we wouldn't have to fill those positions. But unfortunately, we kept them. They were put into the budget 2 years ago. However, I will say that last year we did cut staffing. Last year, we cut an assistant principal at the high school, and there were several people that retired that we didn't fill their positions, and there were a couple positions that we did cut across the district. And we will continue to look at every single day. So someone asked you, why do you always start with level of service? That's actually not where we start. We look at what we need. We look at the students' needs, what they need for special education and general education intervention for both special education and general education students, and then we meet that need where it is.
Next. But while you're walking up, I just want to address two things. One, in very simple terms, our revenue growth is like 3.5% a year. Anything above that, we can't afford. It's very simple. As I think the gentleman in back said, it's revenue and expenses. That's it. It's math. Anything over 3.5%, we don't have the money to pay. That's essentially what it comes down to. So anything above that annually is going to need additional revenue stream in one way or the other. Two, I just wanted to clarify our ARPA use. We, locally in Dunstable, we targeted our ARPA use for one-time revenue, one-time expenses. So we did really focus that. And I think the Select Board and Finance Committee were pretty disciplined about making sure that that money was used for capital, and that's it. So okay, thank you. Sir.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Griesmer. I live on 42 Pond Street here in Dunstable. I have a clarification question about how the town override works between the two towns, or the tax override. Does each town vote on a tax override? And if both have to pass for the tax override to work, if one passes, what happens if one town passes and one town does not pass?
Great question. Who wants to take that one?
Let Mark do it. Yeah.
Mark, why don't you take that one? You're sitting over there quiet. It's a great question.
No, that is a really, really good question. If one town passes it and another town doesn't, the school budget is considered rejected because both towns have to approve the school budget. So if the town meetings pass the school budget but the overrides fail, the school budget is considered rejected because both towns have to pass it. At that point, it goes back to the school committee, and the school committee has a decision to make. They have to decide whether or not they're going to reduce their budget to meet what the towns can pay, or they do have the option of asking for a district-wide meeting to put the full budget back before that district-wide meeting, and then force the community that didn't pass the override to reconsider that option. That's called the nuclear option. I hope we don't get to that. But it goes back to the school district, and the school district will have to make a determination on how to proceed. Would you like that answer, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, if I have this correct, if both reject the override, that still could happen?
That still could happen, correct. It goes back, it's considered a rejected budget from the school district, and they have to go back and decide what to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Jonathan Gertison, Adam Street. I guess a couple thoughts as I ramble here. I forgot my pen, so that's eloquent. Clearly, we're walking a knife's edge, right? Where we don't want to cut the education to our children. At the same time, we don't want to drive senior citizens and others out of our community, right? So compromises have to be made. And in that instance, we look at this, and I have my own personal opinions, but as a town, it feels at this point that the budget that's being proposed is sort of cornering us into one position or another. And to the last question, with the risk of one town, approving it and another town not approving it, right, that creates a whole other set of complexity I didn't think of. But now I'm going to add some more complexity, which is what about the idea of like an a la carte budget proposal, where the town can kind of somewhat choose or put a voice into it? And in corporate America, obviously, we negotiate about budgets and everything like that, and it often comes back and say, great, we already heard it, you got to cut it by 1.5%. I know you wanted 4%, and then they wanted 2%, and we're just going to split the atom. Has that kind of conversation been considered?
So, from the perspective that at town meeting, when we have our annual town meeting, we review the entire budget. We go line by line through the budget, and it's basically, if anyone has a question, we're allowed to come back and review that at that point in time. a motion on the floor of town meeting can amend any sort of modifications that we're presenting in our budget if the town determines that that's the way they would like to go. However, when it comes to the school district's budget, that is not up for itemized discussion. That has been, because we have a joint school board that is together, they've provided us with a number. It's either, that's all in or kind of nothing. So there isn't really the option to discuss or subdivide or change their budget on the floor of town meeting because it's both communities coming together. All of our individual line items are all able to be modified at town meeting with a 2/3 majority on town floor. So anything that's out there aside from the school district budget is open to discussion at town meeting.
Yeah.
Jay, can I ask, I want to follow that. I think the requirement of the school district agreement is that the school committee votes a budget. That budget is given to the finance committee in Groton and the advisory committee in Dunstable.
Yep.
Under the school agreement, the regional agreement, the finance committee has no choice but to present the assessment from the district to the town meeting.
Yep.
Town meeting can amend that assessment any way they want. It's considered a rejection of the budget, but it can be voted up and down. The requirement in the district agreement is that the finance committee must present to the town meeting the assessment from the school district, and then it can be, just like any other line item in the budget, it can be amended, but it's considered a rejection of the budget, and then the school committee does have the option of deciding what they want to do with that rejection.
Yeah.
That's just a slight clarification, Jake, from what you're saying.
Well, potentially. So we have control, the municipalities have control of the bottom line number. We can't go in and say, we want to.
It's the bottom line.
It's the bottom. So we can't go in and say, we want you to cut a first grade teacher, a second grade teacher, and a third grade teacher. That is the school committee's decision. But the bottom line number we have control over now. If town meeting decided to reduce the school budget, it can be done, but then it puts in motion who knows what at that point.
It's $1 here is 3 over there. So like the reciprocal, the effect here is 3 times that in our regional school district.
Yeah.
And it also has an impact on the municipal side of things. So it's not just rejecting the school line item, because any subtraction from there has to be hit on the municipal, the remaining line items.
Okay. But, as you mentioned before, it feels like the town is doing an excellent job of trying to control their costs, and by not being able to address the school board component of it, which represents the majority of our spend outside of these kind of mechanisms, it does, I think, leave this community feel a little bit underpowered potentially to help address or maybe communicate our desires as a community. Because it shouldn't necessarily be all or nothing.
Yeah, completely agree with what you're saying. And unfortunately, the previous question, which we're kind of talking about the nuclear options here, if Dunstable doesn't pass the override and Groton does, and we're forced to a super town meeting, that budgetary request, if that obviously super town meeting or the collective town meeting moves forward, we are responsible for that cost, which then takes, as Jason's presentation, and I'm sure we'll have it up on our website to kind of go through that. When you talk about that $700,000 over our budget as a town, it's devastating, and there is no part of our town that's untouched. We talk about funding for police, fire, library. Probably Jason himself is.
There's nothing left.
There's almost nothing left.
I can fundamentally say we've done the exercise.
We have very few services available.
Like you're down to nothing but the bare minimum of expectations, and even those may not be met.
It's very challenging. So it's not trying to, it's not trying to say it's all or nothing here. But realistically, we've skated a razor's edge for a long period of time. We have done that, and even our own budgetary. We've looked at when we utilization of our not excess and deficiency funds, our free cash. when we used our free cash for operating budget, that was an attempt for us to not go for an override on a regular basis. I've seen that we are continuing to extend our expenses or extend our budget with regard to that, because we didn't want to come to people in the middle of COVID trying to ask for more money, trying to ask for $400,000, $500,000 that we were spending. We legitimately just said that people are hurting enough people are at home, enough people are out of work. There's not an opportunity for us to try to recoup that amount of money within our budget. So we used our free cash to be able to do that. If you go and you look at the state resources that we look into, utilizing free cash for our operating budget is probably one of the riskiest things that a town can do, and that is why we have committed as an advisory board, we have committed to reducing our reliance on free cash as much as possible. We're not coming off it completely. We're just doing everything we can to reduce our reliance on it, because it's not good fiscal practice. Because all the things that we budget for, if all those are spent down to the last penny, we won't have free cash the next year. So if we're planning on $400,000 coming from free cash for our operating budget, and everyone spends all the money they budgeted for, we don't have free cash, and our operating budget has to take a hit of that amount of money. So we have to come off of that, the utilization of that funding as quickly as we can. We're doing so in a staged manner that I think is appropriate to make sure that we're not increasing the burden to the taxpayers as much as possible. We're doing it over a slow burn over a period of years to have that happen, in order to, like I said, not impact the townspeople as much as possible here. So, but we do have to get off that reliance of free cash. It's an absolute necessity, and then go from there. Yeah.
Nikki Rockwell, 52 Massapog Way in Dunstable. First of all, I really want to thank all of you, and I also really want to thank the audience. I think that there's a lot of pressure on everybody, and if you look at social media, you can see a lot of numbers and sort of attitudes and hostility. And I really appreciate personally being here and seeing sort of the kindness in people and trying to really understand what's going on. I also really want to support what Jason said about municipal. I think about, we live in this really lovely spot, but that doesn't mean that there isn't abuse that happens. It doesn't mean that there aren't people on drugs or alcohol or have physical problems within their families. And when you have one policeman going into a situation like that, we all know they shouldn't be going into a situation like that. I feel very strongly about young people and the problems with drugs and alcohol. We really need them to get the support that they can through the people that we have here. So to eliminate that would be a serious problem. I also think there's an implication in one of the, which I don't think was meant, but it was around special education in the schools. And, there are laws around how kids are serviced. We can't control who's coming in and who's coming out of our schools. Some years we need a lot of service. Some years we need less. However, your kid, if they are on an IEP, are still going to be serviced to the letter of the law in our schools, and that costs money. I also want to mention as some people know, I was a teacher both at Swallow Union and at the middle school. You can't function without paraprofessionals, and you can't function without substitute teachers either. After I retired, I went back in. I was paid less money as a substitute than you can get at Walmart. To hear some of the implications about what teachers are getting paid and, what you have to do to keep recertifying and keep yourself on top of the latest sort of cutting edge. When I left, there was one cart of Chromebooks that kind of floated around the middle school, and you were darn lucky if they were all working, and if your project didn't get done, you'd have to wait another month to get that cart back in your room. So we live in a world of technology now. We can't go back. We're going forward. We have to adapt to some of that. I just really want to appreciate the work that every teacher comes in and faces. I know it's been touched on, but after COVID, there was a lot of problem behaviors that teachers had to deal with every single day. And I know the school committee had a visitation by a large number of teachers who all wore red shirts, who were feeling very unsafe in their classrooms. These people who come in as interventionists are really there to try to help in situations that are actually quite dangerous. As you probably all know, somebody got taken out of Swallow Union in an ambulance because of a situation with a child who was young and out of control. We have to keep our teachers safe too. We have to keep the kids in the school safe. So I don't want to beat this as a dead horse, but I want to add one other thought, which is Dr. Chesson helped us through a very difficult time of COVID, but we also have a new superintendent coming in, and one of the charges that we can do as a community is ask them to look at our school system with new eyes and see what he might see through his experience that could be altered, maybe even programs with other districts that could be shared as is happening with the towns. I think there are a lot of possibilities that could open up, and I want to commend everybody, all the work that they've done, but there are always other ways to look at things. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir.
Ben Mahan, Hollow Street in Dunstable. Just a quick question. Beforehand, like years before, there's been some things on the ballot, like, hey, well, do we want to pay for this or pay for that? Everyone that's come up, minus the lady that just came up now, this whole conversation about the budget override is about the schools. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the police officer, the firefighter, and I feel that there's some people in this room that don't have kids in the system, that live in town, great, helps me out. I have 3 kids, thank you very much. You helped me pay for my kid's bill, and I don't want to have these people sit there and say, I'm choosing between having a police officer come to my house to help me, and I have to pay for all these school fees, all the school things. So we're having no one's talking about the police and all that, and it's all about the school. So now we're in that, I guess, my opinion of is like, public safety is one issue, and I have to give up my public safety if I want my kids to go to school with the education they have now. And there's some people in the room that don't have kids in school that are going to be in that tough situation. So I don't know if that's even something that can be discussed to separate the two as a town, to say that's 2 different things here, because it is 2 completely different issues here. And I don't think it's a good idea for us to have this whole demeanor of the schools and certain school members saying, oh, what's the education value? Because we don't want to lose the people that don't have kids in the system, because they pay a lot of the bill. And I don't know the percentile of how many families don't have kids in town, but I don't think we want to get to a town basis where we're losing people that don't have kids and losing them to move out, for then a family moving with 5 kids, and then the budget's going to go up and up and up. So I don't know if there's a way to separate that, or any thought on that.
So, overall, it's one budget at the end of the day. And, we know fundamentally as a select board, advisory board, and our leaders in fire and police, that it is fundamentally important that you have 2 firefighters and you have 2 police officers on shift. And I don't know if anybody reads stats, but it's 25 minutes is the average response time for the ambulance to come to town. You can die very quickly. So it's that critical to me, and I'm that passionate about it, that I want it to be all one budget. Because it's fundamental to me that we have 2 police officers, 2 firefighters in the day. Because people have passed away as a result of a lack of responsiveness.
So we're kind of, I guess, as a voter, I'm kind of like, am I voting to pay for the school? Because if I don't pay for that, then I lose my safety net of coming to help me.
What? A police officer and a firefighter still respond to the school.
I know, but I'm saying, but at the night shift, we're talking the police department, the Saturday night guy not having 2 people, which is, and I don't know what the breakdown was of, and I don't
every night,
and I don't know the breakdown of how much of the override was paying for that versus paying for the school end of it. You know what I mean? If it's $300 is for that override part, or it's $700. I don't know if
It's
there's a
in here,
breakdown
I think,
of that.
Yeah.
off the top of my head, I think it's about $110,000.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
$120,000. So you can, by the way, just to be clear, we could have as many questions as we want. So that is an option. The decision has been made not to do that and to have one. The reality is the number for the town side is substantially, as you could guess, substantially less than the override number for the school side, if you proportion it out. So the idea that an override for the town, assuming it passed, which, by the way, this fiscal year did not, just remember that. But let's assume that it passed for FY25. That gets us another $125,000, let's just say. The school budget, after everything happens, let's say it's $805 for us now, it goes down to $400. We still have a major financial problem that we still can't cover. So that's really, in essence, what the issue is. To separate does not solve the underlying budget problem. And I believe, I don't want to speak for the boards here, but I believe that was part of the decision-making process because the number's so, it's big. So to separate them out like that, even if the town passed and the school failed, let's say, we'd still be in a very, very difficult
situation. Even if you separated the questions and we passed to add a firefighter and a police officer, we would do that for 1 year, and then we would lay them off the next year to bring that money to pay for the schools. It'd be a 1 year solve, and then that officer and that firefighter would be here for 1 year, and then we would just kick it back to them.
Thank you.
And I do have to go back to, we do have one budget, and as we do go over the surveys and everything that people are looking for, those are the two things. It's public safety and education. We're 1 and 2. So as we try to, as one budget, we try to bring everyone's needs together and try to develop a budget that passes or meets the needs of the town or the requests from the town. If we were to subdivide each one of them and everyone turn a light switch on and off for which one, which part of the budget you want, which one you don't want, and you can't go to the library because you didn't pay for that in your taxes this year, it's challenging for us. So we try to listen to what the community has said to us. The best way to do that is obviously forums like this, as well as surveys that were put out there to be able to gather that information and then respond accordingly. We've looked at that and we've tried to develop, I think, the best budget we possibly can here and the lowest possible request for an override that we can see forward. That's it, and that's the way we're looking at it. We're not just lumping everything together to try to, well, here's an override that's required. Let's put all the bonuses and everything in there. That's, believe me, I wish that was the situation. Yeah. No.
Because my first thought was the same, to spread it out, but yeah. Good question.
Thank you.
First, an eternal thank you to that gentleman who understands that those of us who don't have kids in the school system, we're nothing but a help to everyone else. And given the comment about the pre-K and how you didn't want to have someone to come in with a pre-K child and have to pay the property tax and full day kindergarten, that's what it was, full day kindergarten. You didn't want them to have to pay both. There seems to be very little concern for those of us who don't have anyone in the school system and are paying nonetheless. So that's what I wanted to say. It's not just families who are part of this community and who are making the community what it is.
I would say I've supported in both towns. I support the override that supports everything. I support level services across the board for public safety, for senior services, for everything. I never said there's a sacred cow and one thing is more important than the rest. I think they're all
I'm just
equally
saying
important. And so
what you said was you didn't want a family coming in and having to pay a full day kindergarten and property tax. But some of us are paying property tax with no one in the school system.
Were you educated somewhere in a town? Did you receive a public education in the community?
I went to private school in Kingsborough.
Okay, so fine. You chose that.
So,
we can live in a libertarian society if you want.
I'm just saying, there was also comments made on social media how, oh well, move out. And then my other comment is about the cuts that were talked about. In one of the presentations I did to the select board, I talked about the guidance. There's the national average for guidance counselors, which is in the 300s. There's the mass average for counselors to students, which is in the 300s. And then there's the recommended, which is set by the Association of Guidance Counselors, which is, I believe, 250 to 1. Groton Dunstable's is 123 to 1. We are already way above average. And even if you reduce it by 9 guidance counselors, that's over $600,000 that you could save, and we're still above average with guidance counselors.
We actually have 1 guidance counselor at Swallow, 3 at Florence Roach, 4 at the middle school, and 3 at the high school. Those are the guidance counselors we have in the district. The guidance counselor to student ratio at Swallow Union is 1 to 315. At Florence Roach, the guidance counselor ratio is 1 to 169, but the reason we did that is because we brought the guidance counselor that we're going to need next year when 150 new students move from Swallow Union to Florence Roach. And as we've discussed in our presentations, we cannot remove the guidance counselor from Swallow Union because there needs to be guidance counselor services for all of those students throughout their entire time that they're at school. But because we're adding 150 new students to Florence Roach, we needed to put a guidance counselor there. We brought that person on board because our guidance counselors are doing not only general education work, but they also are on special education grids, and they do the bullying prevention program they teach. At the middle school, they have 4 guidance counselors, and the ratio there is 1 to 178. And at the high school, as I've said, we have 3 guidance counselors, and the ratio would be about 1 to 225, I think it is. Overall in the district, the ratio of guidance counselors to students is 1 to 185.
I'm not sure that aligns with the numbers that I was seeing in the budget book, but my point is there are cuts that can be made that are not going to affect class size.
That's true, and each principal made a choice.
Joan.
All right, I'm not going to thank you guys. You've been thanked enough.
Oh, come on.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Joan.
Hey, look, you know what? We wish we could give you everything you want, okay? In the town, too. You know, we talk about Proposition 2.5. You young whippersnappers won't remember when that came into existence. It was because the towns were putting the screws to us just like the school district is, okay? We'd have it coming from both directions instead of just one. So be careful what you wish for, all right? That being said, you know, yes, we have a funding problem. And our biggest funding problem is the fact that it costs $22,000 or whatever the current figure is to educate one child. And I know the average tax bill in Dunstable is $9,000, and I believe the average tax bill in Groton is a little over $10,000, if I'm not mistaken there. You know, that's just not getting the job done. You know, that's not paying for, you know, I think the highest tax bill in Dunstable, the residential tax bill, is like $25,000. That pays for, you know, just one kid. You know, what about the municipal budget? What about the police and the fire and the highway and the library and everything else that has to be paid for out of that money? Okay? So anyway, Jason, I want you to establish a new committee.
Another one.
And this would be a committee. This would be a committee to take donations from everybody that has kids in the system who thinks their child deserves a $22,000 education and isn't getting one. okay? I just say, you know, like I said, I wish we could be everything to everybody, but we just can't. This budget is not sustainable. My wish is that Groton will vote it down. Did you get that? And that Dunstable, actually, I would like to see Dunstable pass this override. Because number one, our municipal budget is, you know, desperate for money. Excuse me. And even if Groton does vote the override down, like they've done for the last 20 years, according to the figures on the state DOR, I think. If they vote it down, then, you know, the school committee, the school district, will go back to the drawing board, and they will sharpen their pencils a little bit. And, you know, we're not looking to, you know, severely damage our children's education. Okay, we're not looking to do that. We want a little bit of relief. And if Dunstable passes the override, then whatever you guys come up with, which will probably be what Groton can afford, we might have, we might have enough money to be able to afford it too. Okay, so I think I've said as much as I need to say.
Beat that, Brian.
I was going to sit down. We don't want to talk about how many cops were in town when I was here. There were two. One was your father. And I don't even want to talk about any of those numbers. The one number that's bothered me is the Boutwell School. When I started doing research, I thought we had 4 schools in town. Didn't know we had 5. Then I researched the building a little bit more, and there's about 70 students in it. First of all, not required by the state except for the special needs. So there aren't all 70 of them are needed. The budget for the school is $875,000. I don't understand why we have that building. I don't know why that students, there's probably, 30 that are required to go to another building in town, another school. I just don't know why we have that building.
In 2017, a company called the Abrams Group did a study of the operational efficiencies of the district. They looked at space usage, they looked at custodials, maintenance, food service. Am I missing something? Prescott. Yeah, Prescott, right, so building usage. They told us to move central office out of Prescott, which we did. It saved us $80,000. They told us to outsource custodial, which we did. It saved us $180,000, give or take. They told us to outsource food service, which we did. They told us to cut down a number of bus runs, which we did. And all these things saved money to the tune of the whole shebang was like $440. We looked at Prescott at the time. There are actually 50 students in Prescott of the 70 students that, I'm sorry, Boutwell, sorry. It's too late, it's been a long day. There are 50 students that are special education students, and they need to be based on their IEPs in classrooms that can only handle about 8 to 10 students. So therefore, there are 5 classrooms that are there of the special education that have special education students in it, and then the 20 typical pairs are spread amongst them. One of the first things that we did when we looked at what we would have to do in response to the override, and it could still happen, was to move the students from Boutwell onto Swallow Union to the rooms that are being vacated because of the students that are moving to Florence Roach. However, they would require major upgrades to the bathrooms. They would require some other therapy rooms that you don't currently have in this building that have to be for children that are 3 and 4 and 5 years old. That doesn't mean to say that it can't happen, but the 20 students are paying tuition, and that tuition is not, we're not having extra teachers because of those 20 students. So it's the money, it's sort of like the whole kindergarten fee argument. So the kindergarten fees, there are some students that have IEPs that require them to have full-day kindergarten. It is free. So those people who are paying for kindergarten fees are offsetting some of the costs that we're paying for those students that have IEPs to go to full-day kindergarten. The same thing happens at Boatwell. We have 70 students, 50 are special education students, they go for free. 20 are, approximately 20 are paying for fees. Those fees are offsetting the cost, not all of it, but some portion of the costs. So we can look at, but we can continue to look at that. But if we do it, we want to make sure that the cost to renovate the sections of this building for 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, which is what would have to happen, does not exceed the savings that we're going to have. The utilities for the building are about $33,000 a year. So we would have to make sure that the yearly cost, even if we spread it over a couple years, the cost to renovate rooms in this building for 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, which would be required to do by law, and also there's the playground outside is not particularly handicapped accessible. It's not ADA. It's a great playground. It's awesome. But not all of it is at the level of the challenges that we have with the students, some of the students we have at Boatwell. So we would have to make changes to that playground. Playgrounds are incredibly expensive to modify and would have to be certified for ADA compliance. So that's something that we're going to continue to look at. We just have to make sure that we're actually going to be saving money and not spending more money by closing that building, moving those students to this building.
Well, I can do quick math, and I can tell you right now that $825,000, you can save money. You pay, first of all, if I'm not mistaken, a student who wants to go there at pre-K pays $2,900. I've been looking at numbers all day, then they say it costs a student $18,000, $20,000 to go to school. What is the $2,900 covering? So these arguments, you can throw them out at me all you want. They don't wash. It's simple.
Anyone else? We're gonna try to keep it to 10, if that's okay with people. We got like 15 minutes.
Hi, I'm Rich Butler, Forest Street in Dunstable. You mentioned that you're in a collective bargaining. When is that going to kick off?
Oh. We actually started earlier this year than we ever had before. Generally, collective bargaining for a contract that ends in June 30th. So the teachers, paraprofessionals, et cetera, their contract gets done June 30th. We would normally have started in January. We actually started in November. Yeah, I think November was our first meeting. Unfortunately, it takes as long as it takes.
The contract for next year?
It's the contract for next year, yes.
So the numbers that we're talking about today don't include, I'm assuming you're not going to have a collective bargaining agreement that's going to go down.
No, but so one of the problems that we have, which is why I said at the very beginning that we told the senior staff that whatever we have is whatever we have. And so therefore, if something unexpected happens, so we had anticipated the increase that would have to happen for paraprofessionals. That's baked into this budget that would require the override, but it's baked into this budget what we would expect to have to negotiate for paraprofessionals. And for teachers, it's close to that, and that is why we have been working very diligently to come up with a creative solution that would match this budget in negotiations, and that's all I can say about that, because we're in the process of negotiating right now.
And I appreciate the work that you guys are doing to try to get that budget down, but I can tell you right now, you have to do more, because that it just keeps going up. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like Erica, I don't have any kids in the school.
Right.
hey, maybe we offer, like the state does on the tax form, anybody who wants to fund the school pays an extra $2,000 a year on their taxes. You know, voluntary tax.
I'm not sure if it's legal,
Yeah.
but the school committee can certainly look into it.
The state does it. State, you can pay the 5.35% or whatever it is, or you can voluntarily pay 12%, which I don't understand why they have such a delta, but, you know. I mean, I understand you've got the passion for the school. Some people.
Part of our community. These are all
No, don't take it. I mean,
I also believe that a good school will promote people wanting to come to live in our community.
oh, and I love that when people tell me that, well, it really helps your property values go way up. Well, if I stay here, if I want to live here until I get carried out, if the whole thing about it helps my property value, if I stay here until they carry me out, when do I realize that increase in my property value? Well, every year when you guys tax me on it. So please don't tell me my property value is going up.
I think you want more, you want to see families moving to this area and the cost of living in this town.
I think we're coming to a fundamental crossroads about the value of education in our society.
No.
Just
I think you got to understand that. I think you have to understand that there's a balloon,
for
right?
almost 3 hours. Come on, let's keep it civil, please.
I waited.
I know. Let's keep it civil, please.
I think what I'm trying to say to you is that the school drives people wanting to come. This is a great town, both towns, right? And so people coming into our community are coming. Some of those people that are coming in are coming in because they are going to have families and they want to come to an area where it's a good school district, right? And all of the efforts that teachers and Laura and Sherry and all of the school committee, when we're looking at education, right, we're looking at also addressing kind of those behavioral, those social, emotional. I mean, like it's not just built on that. So kids are going to be living in your community, and you want those children to be well-rounded, emotionally intelligent, academically intelligent kids. So when they're going out, right, and/or they want to stay in the community and continue to live here, those children are going to become adults, and hopefully they
won't be
stay.
able to live here.
What's that?
They won't be able to live here.
I don't know. I would like to think also that as we continue to kind of communicate with legislation and much like they said, some of that's going to take some time, right? That we hopefully will see kind of a shift in that. But as a community, whether you have children or you don't have children, or you're planning children or not children, right? They are our children. This whole community, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe those children will grow up to be nurses and doctors and so forth,
Love
and be taking care of all of you.
I
So
agree with you,
it's just-
100%.
Yeah.
But what I have to do is say, there's $100, and I give some to the senior citizen, but if I have 70% of that going to a school, I don't have a lot to give to the senior citizen, the police officer, the fire department, the roads, and everything else.
I think when, listen, I'm a clinician and OT, so that the woman who was talking about her children with kindergarten and so forth, and so I could speak on multiple different levels, but we then need to look at like what are other resources so that we can be supporting the seniors and creating those systems so that they have access to some of that. And Brian and everybody else on the school committee, are very cognizant of that. So we're not just thinking, let's just put the kids in the school. So it is multifaceted and it's not easy.
I think we could go on, but...
I know, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Jen?
Just a couple of thoughts here to ponder as we head into the 3 hours here. Again, thank you to all of you. Like so many echoed, I believe there might be 3 or 4 of you up there are paid employees. Everybody else that we're looking at are volunteers. And God bless you all, because you couldn't pay me enough to do what you're doing, so thank you all. I think just some maybe thoughts that we need to think about as we leave here and enter these next 3 or 4 weeks that are going to be very, very interesting in our towns, maybe is the word that I'm going to say. And I've been trying to work with Sherry, thank you, to try to get all of my figures together. And I know based on some of the stuff I saw today, there might not necessarily be 100% accurate, but I've been looking through too many past budget books over the past few nights. But based on the numbers that I saw in the budget book, over the last 10 years, so I'm looking from fiscal year 2014 to the current numbers, our school population has decreased by, give or take, 250 students. Our operating budget figures were our operating budget in fiscal year 2014 was $31,598,000 and some change. And we're looking at an operating budget today upwards of $51 million, give or take a $20 million increase over the last 10 or 11 years with a decrease of 250 students in our population. I think what we need to look at as a school district and as a school committee, if there's any way we're going to get this thing to pass, you need to educate us as to how our cost of students went from $13,000 10 years ago to this $22,000 figure now. We're listening to what the towns have done, how they're regionalizing services, how they're, I think Jason said, he went out and he shopped the health insurance. Is the school district shopping the health insurance? We have, and we're just not finding savings anywhere.
The unions have to, I'm sorry.
It's all part of the collaborative or the collective bargaining agreement, which we're working on currently. It's not an easy conversation. We recognize the benefit of looking at different vendors for health insurance, different ways of offering benefits, PPOs versus HMOs, the various different parts of that. But beyond that, I can't talk about it because it's an executive session, but we are actively engaged in those conversations. I don't know how far we're going to get, but we understand the significance of the ask.
But Jen, you raised a good point. But I have to keep going back to our 75 to 80% of our budget is salaries, right? So when we look over what insurance, and we all know this, right? Because we're all suffering with the increased cost of insurance. So what Faye said, we're working on it, but it has to be approved by a collective bargaining agreement. 4 or 5 years ago, we switched out of the GIC because it was costing us too much money, and we were able to go with an outside insurance broker, and we adopted Harvard Pilgrim. But since then, the risk, we've had some employees who have gotten very ill, and that changes your risk rate, and then that changes your rate.
Yeah.
Right? So we constantly are looking. Justin Williams, who's our
HR.
Sorry, I'm drawing HR here. Who was our HR director, is working with our insurance brokers all the time to try to get a better rate. But so one of the biggest drivers is insurance. The second biggest driver is the cost of special education. So while the number of students may decline, the complexity of the students that we have that receive special education services has increased. So you talked about regionalization. So we have a number of students across the district that are serviced within the district as opposed to sending them outside the district, which even though it's really expensive to have them in the district, it is 6 or 7, or factor of 6 or 7 greater, right, to have them outside of the district. So the increased cost of special education, the increased cost of insurance, and then the fact that even though the bargaining agreements may be reasonable, I'm not going to take a position one way or another about where they are in terms of being reasonable, you have 75 to 80% of your budget that's going up by a factor of a COLA of 2.5%, 3%, right? And then for the first 12 years, teachers are given steps and lanes increases. They're eligible for that. Right. Yes. The step every year they're eligible. So I'm just saying that the complexity of that, those are the things that cause the budget to increase while at the same time the number of students have gone down. And as we've seen right up there in the budget book, it does have, by the numbers, it does have an analysis of this, and it says, in general, school districts with the highest decline in enrollment saw a corresponding increase in per pupil expenditure, and that's because you just don't have as many students. It's been brought to my attention that someone used Provincetown. Provincetown spends $40,000 per student. Do you know why they do that? Because they have 178 students. Okay, so when you have 178 students, even though your budget is very small for your school district, you're only spreading that budget over 178 students, so it's going to cost $40,000 per student. So I'm glad that you looked at the budget books. God bless you, because it makes my eyes blurry. But those are a lot of the reasons that you're seeing that number go up while the enrollment's going down.
And I guess my last question, I'm going to leave the microphone because I know it's very late, is that I know we always talk about level services. I've sat through many, many meetings listening about how we go off of level services. As a parent with 2 kids in this district for the past 10 years, and I look at these numbers and how they skyrocketed, my question is, great, we're going year to year, making sure that we're based on level services. But how are we measuring the success that the level services that we are offering from last year to this year is actually creating a better student today than what we might have had 5 years ago?
Well, during COVID, we had 64% of our students that were needing reading intervention, and today that number is down to 21%. I don't know that, I wish I could say that there's not a direct correlation, nor is there causation between the amount of money that you spend and test scores. Because the number one driver of test scores that you can actually put a line to causation as opposed to just correlation is the socioeconomic background of the community. But there is a base level of services that if you go below that, so it's sort of like class size, right? So people say like, oh, smaller class size better, smaller class size is better. Well, actually, unless you get below like 16 or 17, you don't really get a return on investment. But if you go above 23, 24, 25, then you start to see a decrease in investment. So the same thing happens with the per pupil expenditure.
I'd just like to address one of Jen's questions really quickly, which I think is a very good question, is fundamentally, if we have 200 less students in the district than we did, say, 10 years ago, why does it not cost less to operate the district? And it's a very valid question. I think the answer is not so obvious. When you think about it, we have 13 grades. So if you take 200 students and spread that across 13 grades, it's only 15 students per grade. I think we have 5 sections at Florence Roach at the elementary level. How many do we have at Swallow Union? 3. So that's 8. So you take 15 kids and divide it across 8 classes. It's only 2 kids per class. That's not enough to drop a teacher. You still have 1 business and finance director, 1 superintendent. The cost to heat the buildings, to plow the parking lots is all the same. So even though you might lose 200 students, you don't realize very significant savings. It's not a straight linear function, it's a stepwise function.
Sir. I'll be brief, and I don't know that I actually have a question so much as just a comment. I appreciate you all, both in the audience and at the tables. Thank you very much, Scott Lewis, Lower Dam Way here in Dunstable. At times, part of the conversation can feel very antagonistic, and that can result in some very defensive responses. And I just want to say I don't think that's where any of us are coming from. We're not anti-education. We're not anti-kids growing up and doing well. I think what we're feeling is our revenue and our expenses and our household budgets also matter, and they're not growing at the rate that you're asking us to pay here. So whether it's what you heard here tonight or it's what happens at town meeting or what happens at town election, please understand that's the problem we're trying to solve on our side of the table, and it's not anything about any of you personally or about how we feel about the kids in education. It's about our ability to pay, right? And so we're going to try to do the best we can. We know you're trying to do the best you can, and we also know those don't match, and none of us knows how to solve that. So I just want to say I appreciate everybody, but I also want us all to keep in mind that's where the mismatch is. It's not personalities, it's not people, it's ability to pay and what the challenge before us is. So thank you all. Thank you.
Okay. Can I just say one? Can I just respond to that real quick?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you. I think that's a really excellent way to end tonight, and so I just wanted to follow up from our side to say that we definitely all feel that too. We know, even though the conversations can get heated, we appreciate all of the people in both communities very much, whether they have kids, whether they don't have kids. I think all of us love our towns that we live in, and we all chose to live here and to be here. We all love our neighbors. Many of you are my neighbors. And so I wanted to just sort of end on that note, and to also say that we do understand how hard this is, and we are all working extremely hard to figure out how we can make what we do have stretch for as long as we can. And I think every single one of us is committed to that, and will remain committed to that, so that should the override pass, we're going to stretch it as long as we can. And so I wanted to conclude with that. Thank you.
Okay. Just want to thank everyone for coming and your endurance. 3 hours. Very good. Really appreciate the respectful dialogue, thoughtful dialogue. Couple reminders. March 6th is the next one if you want to go through this again. March 6th at the Groton Center at 7 o'clock. Special town meeting on this issue, March 26th. 7 o'clock right here in this room. April 2nd is the town election for the override vote. So those are important dates. So thank you very much.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Woo.